Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all tonight to the first meeting that we've been able to hold at Hounslow House. So a big day today, and hopefully we will be meeting here again regularly. Fingers crossed. Anyway, my name is Councillor Danish Said, and I'm the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny. I would like to welcome all the committee members this evening, and I would like to welcome our guests, Councillor Catherine Dunn, Cabinet Member for Communities and Climate Emergency, Councillor Hanif Khan, Cabinet Member for Transport and One Hounslow, Councillor Shantanu Rajwat, Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Services, Clive Palfreman, Executive Director of Finance and Resources, Victoria Lawson, Executive Director of Environment, Culture and Customer Services, Mandy Skinner, Assistant Chief Executive, Elliot Brooks, Director of Communities, Ben Knowles, Assistant Director of Communications, Public Affairs and Engagement, and representatives from the Transport for London. And I was going to say I'd like to welcome members of the public, but we don't have any, so. And Councillor Salman Shaheen, of course, my colleague. Anyway, I would just like to say we really do have a really full agenda this evening, and some of the items I think this evening have already proved to be rather contentious and emotive, as we've seen with the constant flurry of emails back and forth. I would really like to remind everybody that although passion about the topics is helpful, I would like us all to be mindful about how we speak to one another and to remain polite at all times. The first topic on the agenda this evening is the council tax support system. I would like to remind members that this came to the OSC during the last municipal year as a call-in, hence the committee being keen to help shape any future model. Councillor Rajwat was most supportive of this. This is an opportunity for us this evening to engage in pre-decision scrutiny and contribute to a new council tax support system proposal. Hopefully the committee is part of a collaborative policy development process rather than being focused on post-discussion policy. Okay. Before we actually start, are there any apologies for absence? Okay, and I would just like to mention that Cornwall Chowdhury will be leaving early, so please note that. Right, we were going to start with the minutes, so if you could all look through those, please. Sure. Of course.
I'd just like to declare that I've had a number of emails from individuals and groups regarding an item on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I think we should do declarations of interest. It is there.
Yeah.
Yep. So I would like to say the same.
Okay.
I'd also like to say that I am not a member of One Chiswick. It doesn't have members, but I am obviously in receipt of information that it provides to us. It's significant in my ward.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair, yes. I would also like to say that I've been communicated to by members in my ward and around Chiswick.
Right.
Sorry, Chair. I was going to say, I think we've all had some sort of emails or group emails, but so yeah, just to say that as well.
We all have. So that has been noted. Thank you. Okay, if we could all look at the minutes, please. I'm sure you've already all perused them. I would just like to say that tonight there are so many minutes, so we will be taking them as a collective. We have already received some comments in relation to some grammatical errors. These have been corrected and republished on the website. What we're going to do now is actually agree that's what we're here to do, is agree that the content is accurate. So is everybody happy to agree to the minutes?
I just had one comment, Chair. The 2nd February meeting, the members present doesn't have my name.
Okay.
Listed. Thanks.
Right. That will be sorted out. Anybody else? Okay. Now, due to COVID, nobody's going to bring the minutes over to me, so I already have them here, so I will sign these. Does everybody agree the minutes? Yeah.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay. Would Councillor Rajwat like to stand up and present along with Councillor Shaheen?
Do I have to stand up, Chair?
Well, whatever makes you comfortable, you can sit down.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for having me here this evening. As Chair introduced, I'm Councillor Shantanu Rajwat. I'm the Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Services. Just a very brief introduction to the team that's joining me this evening. We've got Harminder Prasad, who is the head of our Revenues and Benefits function, and Councillor Salman Shaheen, who will also be helping with the presentation. He's the Cabinet Assistant for Finance and Corporate Services. Clive Powerfulman does send his apologies. Unfortunately, he's having to isolate, so he is very sorry that he can't join us, but he is following at home, he tells me, so watching very closely, so apologies for that. So the purpose of our coming here this evening is to talk to you about the new proposed council tax scheme. Now, members will recall there was a lot of talk about this at the beginning of the year, and at the time I was very supportive of coming back and doing some pre-decision scrutiny, which is what we're here today. And I'm very grateful to Overview and Scrutiny for accommodating us in their work programme. It does mean a lot, and I will value the feedback that we get today. So, as I said, we're looking at options around the new council tax support scheme. And in doing so, I'm mindful of some of the comments that Overview and Scrutiny made back in February to consider the future proposals and its impact, especially in light of COVID, and then make all information available, and then ensure that consultation is well planned. So this evening, what we hope to cover are the principles around the new council tax support scheme, and an explanation, hopefully, as to why we think it's necessary to change our current scheme, and then give you a flavour of some of the changes that we are thinking through. What I would say at this point to members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is, in taking your role very seriously, this is not the end of the process. This is very much the start of the process. So we are looking forward to getting your feedback. Nothing at this point is set in stone. We are still thinking about this and developing proposals. So your input genuinely will be well appreciated. So to start with, some rationale as to why we want to change the scheme as it stands. I think anyone that looks at the scheme will realise very quickly that it's not an equitable scheme. Working age households on universal credit receive a higher earnings disregard than those on housing benefits. In essence, at the moment, we are running a dual scheme. In an ideal world, the migration from housing benefit onto universal credit would have already happened, and you'd have one universal scheme. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened, so we need to look at how we make it fair to those on housing benefit. The scheme is also quite complex. I mean, just before we came in here, Councillor Shaheen asked the question of Harminder, you know, what do we assess? And actually, just listening to some of the things that are assessed as part of an application for council tax support, were incredibly complex, and you know, within 5 seconds I got lost in them. So we do need to make it a little bit more simple, and for the reasons that I just set out a minute ago, the scheme's not up to date. As the slide says, and I'll let members read it, you know, everything was assessed based on as part of an application for housing benefit. The link between housing benefit and council tax support no longer exists since the introduction of universal credit, and the proposed scheme or what we hope to bring in, we hope will apply fairly and consistently to all of those who qualify. And as I said, the migration will eventually happen. Those on housing benefit will eventually move on to universal credit. That's a process that's set by the DWP, and they have paused it because of the pandemic. And we're waiting to hear when they will start up that, or allow us to start that process up again. So what are the similarities between what's proposed and the current scheme? I feel very proudly and very passionate that we must protect our most vulnerable. And any scheme that gets introduced in my name must continue to do so. That is an absolute principle that is a red line for me, and I will never deviate from that. Also within that, as with the current scheme, those of pension age will not be impacted in any way by the new scheme. Lone parents and residents with disabilities will also not be disadvantaged. And those residents who currently receive 100% discount on their council tax liability will continue to do so, unless, of course, their circumstances change. And hopefully you get a flavour of that as we go through this presentation. I'll hand over to Councillor Sheehan now.
Thank you very much, Shantanu. So we've moved on to the next slide, we're going to see how might the proposed scheme work. And I really want to draw your attention to the word might. You're going to see it a lot throughout the next slide in almost every single sentence. The reason for that is this is a scheme that's very much open to being shaped. This is why we're here today, to take your feedback at this very early stage. Of course, we're going to be consulting thoroughly with residents as well to really build out this scheme and make sure it's absolutely fundamentally meeting all those red lines that Shantanu mentioned, is fair and protects the most vulnerable and works effectively. So how might it work? Well, it might only look at a resident's net earned income, ignoring any universal credit or any other income which the claimant receives. So here it's about simplicity. It's about making it a fair, open, easy, transparent, simple scheme, which it cuts away reams and reams of complexity from the previous scheme, which was just incredibly difficult and costly to administer. So it will no longer be looking at potentially under this new scheme at household composition or other income or the band of property. So we're not penalising people with larger households, and it might look like an income banded scheme, and you've seen this in previous plans that came here, and this is something that is part of what we want to sort of put before you today, is some potential income bands, perhaps then small changes in a resident's income, moderate changes in a resident income doesn't necessarily mean it's going to change their entitlement to council tax support, which of course makes the scheme both easier to administer and easier for the resident to understand and administer for themselves. So how is this proposed scheme different from the current scheme? Well, first of all, we have to recognise that the current scheme is working on very old parameters. It was based on the working age scheme, on the old council tax benefit regulations since 2013. So that means that the award is calculated by comparing income with an applicable amount. This is going to change now. We're looking in the way we're looking at this. We're going to move away from those older regulations, which looked at which are tied to older benefits such as job seekers allowance, tax credit, or income support. Many residents are now on universal credit, and of course, all residents eventually will be moved over to universal credit. So this will align one scheme, one simple system for all residents. So it'll be very, very much about modernising the scheme and making sure it is in line with current benefits. So as Shantanu mentioned, it's going to continue the advantage of this scheme. It's going to continue to support those on lowest incomes. Absolute red line for all of us here. It's fairer and it's simpler. So it's fairer insofar as it doesn't create a disparity between those on on universal credits and the older and more outmoded forms of benefits. It's simpler both for the resident, simpler for us to administer. And it's really important here, this point. This is not about saving money for the council by cutting any benefits to people. This is about, if there is any saving to be made, it will be a saving through administrative costs, and that's very important. It will allow for quicker decisions, both for us and for residents, and it's more flexible, as mentioned, and that these really are the fundamental benefits to both us and the residents for the scheme. And I'll hand over to Shantanu.
Thank you. So just a flavour of the consultation that we're going to undertake. So obviously we are here at Overview and Scrutiny to shape this, and your feedback is greatly appreciated. We'll also be engaging with the voluntary sector, including disability organisations, the CAB, the DWP, and similar, the housing team as well, because we know the link between council tax support and housing, and we'll also undertake an equality impact assessment. So the next slide looks at a proposed scenario. So again, just to reiterate, for the avoidance of any doubt, these are not set in stone. This is an example of how you can set the bands. The bands are very much for us as a council to set and for me to look at, but this is one example which we think continues to protect the most vulnerable, and offering support where it's needed. And I'll hand over to Harminder for any comments that she wants to make on these.
Okay, so thank you, councillors. So obviously the scheme we have at the moment is quite complex in that we look at earned income and other household income as well. We look at the family size, the household size, and we do a calculation which is quite difficult for our residents to comprehend at times. So what we're thinking is we'll lose banding, and what we're looking at here is maybe a banding from 0 earnings to 250. And at the moment, we have just under 10,000 customers who fall into that category, and they get 100% support. So the scheme we're proposing would at all, they'd continue to get their 100% entitlement. So these banding examples are just purely there as numbers at the moment. We can, but we thought these were quite vast thresholds to look at, and the impact is more for those who are higher earners as opposed to our lower earners, and that's the objective here. So just moving down, for instance, for those earning 1,500 a month, we've got 391 residents at the moment that are on council tax support. And those on £2,000 per month or more, we've only got 56. So it's just to show you a variation and to emphasise that those who are our lowest earners will not, won't be paying anything towards their council tax with this scheme if we were to go ahead with it. So as Councillor Rajwanda said, it's just an example there. This is a very simple example that I've put in the slides, and it's just about a single person. And we've broken it down into 3 schemes where we're looking at those that continue to get their 100%. Scheme 2 would have been where we're charging them slightly, and scheme 3 again. So it's going up by £10 equations throughout on the banding. And in this examples, we're showing that this individual, because of his earnings being £174.26 for a month, falls within the first threshold and therefore won't be liable to pay any council tax at all. And that's an example there. If we were to consult on this, obviously I would include more examples with people on disability living allowance and the impact there, and just demonstrating that we're not including any other income but the earned net income only. So I hope that helps.
So the next slide I will articulate near the end, but it just gives you a flavour of how COVID has impacted the caseload for council tax support. And obviously very happy when we get to questions to answer any questions on that, but I'll come back to this in a little bit.
And I mean, With the next slide, I just want to give you a very brief overview of the other welfare support that we as a council provide. I'm sure many councillors have direct experience with helping residents with a range of these different benefits and work. To remember that we have a holistic safety net for the most vulnerable residents in our borough that doesn't just fall on council tax support. For example, we help residents with rent arrears by paying a discretionary housing payment. We help with payments to residents in crisis, which includes helping residents who are moving into accommodation and need help with basic furniture and white goods. Due to COVID, we're providing additional grants to help residents and households suffering hardship due to COVID, and we administer an emergency food and essential supplies grant. This can help with utility arrears. We offer help to those who have been told to self-isolate due to testing positive for COVID and not being able to work from home. We help households with free school meals for their children, and we've recently been issuing vouchers, and we help with school uniform clothing grants. So a whole range of different measures of support for our most vulnerable residents. Shan.
Thank you. So just to go back, as I promised, to the graph, just to articulate it. So before COVID, just to give you a sense of the numbers, COVID was increasing at a rate of 7.4 extra households supported per month. Presently, it's increasing at 5.7 extra households. So it just gives you a sense that, during COVID, we did see a spike, but even as restrictions are starting to lift, there is a general uptake in the number of cases that we're dealing with. And to put that into a number, now we're looking at around 19,000 households supported by council tax support, as opposed to just under 18,000 pre-COVID. So it is a big increase that we're dealing with. But if it does help the most vulnerable, both because of COVID and otherwise, then I've always said that that's money well spent. So, Chair, that is the presentation. Very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillors Rajwat and Shaheen. Would anybody like to start off by asking a question? Councillor Gamal Lal and then Councillor Mashisho.
Okay, Chair. Quite clearly, we say it's quite complex and difficult for residents to understand. I include myself in that as well. Even for councils, I think it's sometimes to get your head around this is very, very difficult. My first question really is to officers and to Councillor Rajwat is that are we creating something totally different? Have we looked at other boroughs who are doing something similar? Are we first off the mark, etc.? The second question, I'll give more than one go. On page 26, under the fifth bullet point, it mentions that it's more flexible, which is fine. And any increase in council tax payments will only be when there is a larger change in earnings. What is defined as a larger change in earnings? I understand this obviously still in its infancy, but if they can clarify that, that would be good. And in terms of the graphs that were presented on the following pages, pages 28 and 29, maybe it's by default. I mean, some of the columns, the numbers are missing, like the current contribution and the current cost to LBH are missing in that one. Yep, and the following page 29, like I said earlier, it's difficult to understand. So can somebody just give me a clarification as to income and earnings and why we disregard the earnings and what's the difference? That's it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lal. So in answer to your first question, a simple answer to some question, yes, we've looked at what other boroughs are doing. There is a difference because it's locally administered, so it's not a standard scheme that the government sort of prescribe. Each borough has to create its own scheme, and within there is a lot of flexibility. I think if I look at West London colleagues, you know, a fundamental decision is how much support you offer, up to what threshold. So a lot of our West London colleagues are have moved to a system which only offers a maximum of 80%, whereas we're very much wedded to offering 100% support where needed. And I think it's Brent is the other local authority that is also doing the same thing. All the other ones in West London are at 80% now. So we are looking at what they're doing, and you know, using that as a example to base it on our local circumstance. The second part of your the second question that you asked. The principle here is that you introduce a banding scheme. So if you're earning between, say, in the example that Ahmed has given you on the table, earning between £0 and £250 a month, you'll get full support. Now, if you are earning, say, £174, which is the example on the next table, and your income goes up to £180 a month, for example's sake, you will still be within that band. So you won't need to report to the council, as you have to do now, that my income's changed, and go through a full assessment again to get a new council tax support rate. Obviously, if you start earning £251 a month, then there will be a reassessment. But we feel that having that flexibility within the bands gives people the opportunity to flex and you know, supports those potentially on 0-hour contracts as well, who have variable incomes as well. And then can I ask Hamid to take your third question?
So I think the question was, what is the difference between income and earned income? Well, earned income would be for someone who goes out and actually does a physical job, whereas the other earnings they may get is related to the benefits that they're entitled to. It might be related to tax, credit tax, family tax. So all that would be disregarded. So it depends on the circumstances of the individual. So the aim of this scheme is to just look at the earned incomes only, to simplify it. And Councillor Rajwan's just explained that slight increase in income is not going to impose any change in calculations or a new bill being sent to that resident, which is the case at the moment. You may be on 0 hours contracts, you're in and out of employment, and you're inundated with bills, because we have to do that with the legislation as it is at the moment and the scheme that we're using. So we're trying to move away from that.
It's worth pointing out as well, if I may, that only looking at earned income and not at benefits is more generous as a formulation, because your benefits are not being taken into account. That is free income, essentially.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, let me say congratulations to members of the committee who were there when this item was actually called in by Councillor Theo Dennison. And I'd like to say that the response, I congratulate you for finally responding to this in time for the next cabinet. And you've said already that you will consult with us continually until it's implemented. So I also want to extend my thanks to you. But I want to hold you to account, because what the most important items that were raised at that juncture back in January last year was that talking about it was lack of consultation. And I want to know who you're going to consult, which stakeholders you're going to consult in this particular juncture. I also want to look at I think you said at the beginning that you're changing the policy framework or the council tax framework. Is that you? Yeah. Could you expand a bit further as to what the new framework actually looks like? I know you gave us a comparable as to the new budget or the new payment versus the old. Could you just go into detail as to how you came to that and if there's any legal ramifications? And then my last point is to do with the fact that, you know, we're talking about how you're helping the vulnerable and how gracious of you to do that. But in actual fact, this money is coming from the COVID-19 funds. And it's my understanding that in terms of council tax support, you are, I think, £7 million underspent. Are we going to use that money to support our most vulnerable residents, if we're talking about vulnerable residents here? So I just wanted to expand a little bit further as to where the funds were coming from in order for you to support our vulnerable residents initially, and whether that's going to be carried forward for the council tax reduction in 2022.
Thanks, Councillor Moshisho. So who we will consult, a flavour of who we will consult is on one of the slides that I presented. So it includes disability groups, the DWP, the Citizens Advice Bureau. I will be going to the Disability Community Forum, whose engagement I greatly value. But if there are others that you think that we should be consulting with, we're very happy to. This will go through the council's own consultation committee as well. So if they pick up on anyone that we've perhaps missed, I'm very happy to consult far and wide on this. There's no limit as to who can feed in, and the general public as well, through normal consultation channels. Obviously, with disability groups, we'll find a special way to engage with them, so they feel that they can give us meaningful feedback. But happy to get feedback. I would say I'll ask Harminder to answer your second question, but certainly on your third question, I think there's a misunderstanding, Councillor Moshisho. Some of the other support that Councillor Shaheen mentioned in his slide has derived from some COVID funds, but the core council tax support scheme is included in the budget every year. And it costs us, about £26 million every year, and we budget for that every year. With the COVID funds that you mentioned, where they are specifically targeted to a specific group or cohort, they will receive that money. That is not topping up our council tax support scheme. That is additional extra support that is available at this time. I mean, are you able to take the second one? Yeah.
Just to clarify, it's not a framework we work to, but every authority has to have their own local council tax support scheme. So every year we revisit our scheme, and for a number of years we haven't changed ours. But it's not a framework. What we are obliged to have a scheme, and we are reviewing it on this occasion. And what Councillor Rajwant was saying is that we've got a housing benefit scheme and we've got universal credit, and the two don't tie up together. Universal credit is a DWP administered benefit, whereas housing benefit is ours. So at the moment, we've got some residents who are on housing benefit, and we have to calculate their council tax support on those legislations which are of old benefits and old regulations. And then we've got those who are on universal credit who are on council tax support, and we've got to look at the DWP legislation to do that calculation. So we're trying to move away from that so that it's fair and consistent. At the moment, on some points, our residents on universal credit may be benefiting slightly more with the council tax support scheme we have. So we want to try and eliminate that. Does that help?
It does. Obviously, Chair, if you don't mind going, yeah. As we transition from council tax from one band of credit to universal credit, obviously, as you know, it's not going to be a wholesale change. It's going to be slow, almost glacial, one by one kind of change. When we come across those situations, which I'm sure we are coming across now, could you explain to the committee how we deal with that, where you find a situation where the current benefit system that they're under is paying perhaps a lot more than a universal credit at that stage, and how do you kind of marry those two together? Because I speak from experience, as in my father is on benefits, and he's going through that transition, and in actual fact, it's universal credit pays more, but there's cases where it pays less. But how are you dealing with that transition? Well,
we're not in that position yet, but what's happening is it's an automatic change. So if one of our residents moves address, for instance, or goes to another authority, they will then have to go on to universal credit. If their circumstances don't change at the moment, they're going to remain on housing benefit. So we've got a consistent caseload at the moment with our housing benefit residents. It's only those that move away from housing benefit and move on to universal credit. But again, I have to emphasize universal credit is a DWP benefit, and it's not one that we're involved in. There are certain areas where they may give more allowances and we give less, but that is a decision whereby, due to a change of circumstances, the resident has asked to move onto the new benefit. We support them by helping them with rent arrears and giving them discretionary housing payments. We can support them through council tax support. And indeed, if they're resettling, we can support them with white goods or help them to get some additional furniture for their property. Those are the things that we can do. We can't get involved in the universal credit side of things, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Biddulph.
Chair. I may have missed something that you said on the chart explaining how the bands might work. What is that single 4, the bottom row? You haven't got any income next to it.
Councillor, that's just indicating that they earn over the 2,000 mark.
So it doesn't matter.
No.
The figure doesn't matter. Okay,
No,
thanks
they
very much.
wouldn't be entitled.
Okay. On page 29, you've got examples, plural, of how the proposed scheme will work, but you've only shown a single person. What are the implications for others?
For others, unfortunately, I didn't have the examples ready in time for the slides. I had to submit the papers. What we would have demonstrated there is that if someone's on disability allowance, we're not going to be looking at that income at all. We will just look at the earned income. And what we would have done is a comparison of what they're getting now on the old scheme and what they'll get on the new scheme. And in some of the cases, they would probably be more beneficial with our new scheme. In some instances, they may just drop slightly. So that's what we were going to try and demonstrate. I do have those examples now. It's unfortunate I couldn't include them and happily share those.
I think it's important to see those. Any configuration that is fairly
Yes.
typical. I don't know if couples are in a different category as well. I think we should see all of that.
Okay.
And then, Chairman, just one more, if I may. You said consulting thoroughly. And consulting is a big issue this evening. It's a big issue across the borough at the moment. What does thoroughly mean? Because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Obviously, I've seen the list of organisations that you're going to. I don't know how representative those organisations are of the people we need to be looking at in terms of this. And the list doesn't include individuals. What about consulting with individual claimants?
Do you want me to? Councillor Biddulph, we are going to write to all our residents, especially those who will feel the change maybe, i.e. we are changing our scheme. You may be impacted, you may not. This is our consultation paper. This is our phone number. This is the email address. Reach out to us. We'll talk you through it. We are also going to consult with our voluntary organisations who we have immediate dealings with anyway, and especially in this pandemic, like Cross, Step Change, CAB. You know, we have our connections with them, and we will carry on that consultation with them as well. The proposal is that, you know, we may be able to do face-to-face, but I was going to set up a range of Teams meetings and invite people to attend, take questions, go through the paper with them, explain to them, show them the examples and take it forward in that way.
Okay, thank you. I think it's very important to make sure that people don't fall through cracks because they haven't been asked. That's the point, really, is we need to make sure we're asking everybody who should be asked.
Yeah,
that certainly is what we're aiming to do.
Yeah, it's a very important point, Councillor Biddulph, and yeah, noted absolutely. As I mentioned, I think to an answer to Councillor Lyle, we have our own internal structure for consultations and looking at the consultation documents and the equalities impact assessment, certainly the last time the scheme, the proposals that didn't go forward, they were scrutinised by them, and they suggested some additional people that we may want to talk to, and we'll do exactly the same again this time, so that we, you know, I want to try and get to as many people as possible. That is a stated aim, and that means that we will, you know, we want to try and make sure that people don't fall through the cracks wherever possible.
Didn't see age concern on the list. I'd just like to put in a plea for them, please.
Noted.
Yes, I'll put a note.
Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening to all. Yes, I do have some questions, please. It's great that we have new proposed council tax support scheme for our residents, for the less fortunate. I know that we do have a timetable implementation, but do we have an exact proposed date when we're going to really implement it?
So the legislation says, and correct me if I'm wrong, Harminder, that we need to notify the DWP by January if we're going to change the scheme. So January becomes a key date. Obviously, any changes that we do introduce, although we have to inform the DWP that we're thinking about changing it, the formal agreement process is through the budget in February. So, but that's the sort of timetable, and we're leaving plenty of time for consultation to look at the consultation and have some more conversations about it.
Great. I have another question. Have we taken prior to this a financial assessment to see if we're going to be impacted positively or negatively by the new proposed council scheme support?
So at this point, because it's early in the stage, obviously, yes. Forgive me, Councillor George, the answer will be slightly vague at this point. Potentially, depending on where we land on the bands, there may be a bit of a saving in terms of the administration, as Councillor Sheen said, in there. If we're slightly more generous, it may cost us slightly more. So at the moment, that financial impact is to be confirmed, depending on where we land in the consultation and the actual bands we end up using. So it's a little bit of watch this space at the moment.
Okay, great. Do we also have an internal data where we store information about residents, and we do share with, Housing Benefit, DWP, Universal Credit, where we're collecting information about our residents and how that's going to impact unpaid carers, care leavers, the less fortunate,
It's a bit of a technical question. I'm going to ask Harminder to answer that, if that's okay.
I can repeat that again.
Hi. Yes, we do have data of our residents who are claiming housing benefit and council tax support. We have the whole council tax base because that's something I oversee as well. But we don't easily share our information with the DWP for obvious reasons. But if there is a need to, we do. The DWP equally don't share all their claimants' details with us either. We do have a joint up system though.
Right.
And we have to have access, and there's a couple of steps we have to take before we have access to the DWP systems. So we do have that in place, yes.
Okay, great. And I had one more question about the equality impact assessment. How is that going to work? Who will implement this? Who will take it, though? How is it going to work for the housebound residents? And those who can't use the internet and the technology?
Yes. One of the things is we're going to have easy read as well available. I will be working with the equalities team. I will be writing the equality impact assessment and working closely with the team. And as we consult with the groups, that will be included in the assessment as well. Their questions will be taken on board and any ideas that they share with us. And obviously the impact on various groups will be identified.
It's a really important point. I mean, for example, when I go to the Disability Community Forum, they absorb data in EasyRead, so we know to present in EasyRead, and that's what Celia Golden and her team will help us sort of shape, so that we're not bombarding people with information that they can't really digest and understand. It's an important point and one that we take very seriously.
Thank you.
Councillor Akinzada.
Thank you very much. Just a few things which Councillor Mashisho have touched on this scheme, that because I don't think so there is any legal requirement for everyone to move on to universal credit or not. So if that's not the case, and of people who are still on the old system and the one who move on to the new proposal and stuff, how we will have create the balance so that nobody can get worse off in both the situation. That's my first question. And the second question is, as I'm looking into all these different proposals, like, proposal 1, proposal 2, and proposal 3. And there is, of course, for these proposals, there will be different qualifications, different impact on different scenarios. So if we can have more information how it's going to affect people like, single parents, people with more children and all that stuff, so that we can then work out that which proposal will be more beneficial for our resident, because at this stage I can't see any more information which we can kind of tally against one proposal or the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mashisho. And Harminder, maybe I'll correct me on your first point, but I think the direction of travel from government is that eventually everyone will be on universal credit at some point or the other. They're transitioning away from what's known as legacy benefits. So the pause that's occurred is mainly due to the pandemic, but I think eventually everyone will.
They may not move on to the pensioners at all. Right. They may remain. As it stands, those in temporary accommodation will not be moving on to universal credit, but that can change. It seems every time there's something complex, it remains with the council to administer. So we have to wait and see what the legislation says as time goes on. But for the time being, those on housing benefit who aren't pensioners, who aren't in temporary accommodation, are presumed to move across to universal credit in time.
And then on your second point, Councillor Cruzalla, we will share those examples with you so you can get a sense of some worked examples. And I'm very happy to engage again once you've had time as a committee, as individuals, to digest that, and any questions that you may have on that. I'm very happy to engage with that.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to ask a question? Cornwall, Councillor Chowdhury.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. On page 31, it says that there are additional grants available to help residents. I just wanted to ask, how is this help communicated? Is this something that's actively done, or is this something when a household or a resident contacts you, is at that stage, is it then offered? And then also what the uptake has been like? Thank you.
Yeah. So obviously all these welfare support that we offer is on our website, and they're interlinked. So if you go onto housing benefit, it will be interlinked into the various things. If you're self-isolating, it interlinks into the other support we offer as well. So that's the way the web pages are at the moment. Your other question was, what we have is a unified team. So it's called the Unified Assessment Team, and it's the same housing officers, housing benefit officers, who look at an application and they determine, do they need help with rent? Do they need council tax support? Are they suffering because their children are at school and they can't afford their meals? Do you think they're being entitled to free school meals? The idea being, we'll process one application and determine if they qualify for any of the other benefits.
And just to expand on that very slightly, you'll note when Cabinet meet next, one of the reports on the agenda is around the community solutions. So, one thing we found, and Councillor Dunn and Mandy are taking this forward, is that the interlinking of council departments and council work really worked quite well during COVID. So it's taking that model forward so that some of the people in Harminder's team can work in some of Mandy's team and Elliot's team to try and link that up. So again, coming back to Councillor Biddulph's point, people don't fall through the cracks when they need support. And that's an important key piece of work as part of the One Hounslow programme that you'll see it coming to Cabinet next week, I think. So it's worth reading that as well in conjunction with this.
Okay, thank you. Just a comment, or a comment really. Some years ago, I was a single parent with young children and in receipt of benefits. And I remember when I actually started working, I lost a lot of other things along with that. It's things like prescriptions, and there's so many other. I just think when we're doing this, we need to be really, really careful that parents, single parents in particular, aren't losing out in other ways, because it really felt for a couple, as if I was, worse off. It really seemed as if the difference was neither here nor there, and I was just working and frazzled. So I really think we need to sort of keep that in mind, because the housing benefit stops, everything suddenly stops, and you're really not. So I just think, please bear that in mind. Thank you.
Chair, if I may say, it's that sort of experience that we're looking for. We don't want to disadvantage anyone that needs the support out there. If we wanted to do that, we wouldn't have a council tax support scheme, or we'd offer 80% support. So your comments are received, noted, and very much in my mind.
Thank you. Okay. Does anybody else have any more questions this evening?
Chair, yes, just to add to what you just said there is a particular friend of mine who is in the London Borough of Chiswick, Ealing Borough Council. And just as you've said, the situation where he is waiting for universal credit to kick in was 6 weeks, and he was very desperate. So we have to make sure that as a council, that whenever that transition happens, we are alert to it, so that those people don't suffer, as my friend has, and as probably you have when that time was occurring.
That's actually a very good point. The wait time is actually quite long when people stop working for whatever reason, or they're sort of working with agencies. Then if they've applied for a benefit, it sometimes takes 6 to 8 weeks, and they are without the income. So, we need to make sure that these people are not falling, through any sort of nets. It's very, very important. Thank you. Right. Does anybody else have any questions or any sort of proposals? Oh, sure. Sorry. Councillor Lukey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You mentioned the other benefits that we that we work with, the kind of discretionary benefits, and others that we have some control of. And I know through finance and through the housing department, I've worked with some residents to access these. Can we have a list of those for members, please? Sooner rather than later, and qualifying and on what basis people qualify for those, and possibly also these grant schemes, not just grant schemes that are available through the council, but grant schemes that are provided elsewhere. Through other organisations. If you can let us have those, let members have those, or even just post it up on the website. But at least members in the short term, please.
Yeah, very happy to, Councillor Lukey.
Okay, if nobody has anything else to add, I would just sort of round up what proposals that we are going to be, what we've come up with, really. And one thing that is definitely key is that there needs to be very extensive consultation. Something like age concern, they seem to be the forgotten sector of society. And I know you said that they're not going to be impacted, but it's just worthwhile sort of thinking who else we can consult with, because as I say, there are many people who are forgotten. It'd be great at some stage if we could have some more worked examples of, we've had the single person today, but if we could have families, and again, single parents where the children are suddenly not going to school or they're off to university, again, that makes a difference with the amount of money they receive. So there's lots of different factors that we sort of need to consider. Anyway, I would like to thank Councillors Rajvat and Councillor Shaheen, and of course Harminder, for their presentation this evening. And if anybody else has any proposals, please send them to me. Thank you. You may leave if you wish. You're going to stay? Okay. Thank you. Okay, we will now start with our second topic for the evening, which is the consultation, engagement and community development. I've just got a few notes for myself here. Again, tonight this is more about pre-decision scrutiny. And again, it hopefully provides us with an opportunity to look at how OSC can help shape community engagement. I think some of the points to be remembered tonight is that we need to consider the proposed improvements to engagement and consultation. We need to consider how engagement and consultation can support councillors' community leadership role. 3, perhaps consider how the neighbourhood fund scheme can support members. And lastly, how OSE could provide some ideas tonight, hopefully, to support the London Borough of Hounslow with engagement and consultation. If Councillors Dunn would like to present.
Sorry, Chair, we're just having a problem getting the slide deck up.
It's okay.
So perhaps if I talk whilst they faff. Okay. So to introduce things, firstly, Chair, I'd like to thank you very much for tabling this item on tonight's committee and for inviting me here this evening. I'm joined by Ben Knowles, who just spoke to you, who's the Assistant Director for Communications, Public Affairs and Engagement, Elliot Brooks, who's the Director for Communities, and Mandy Skinner, the Assistant Chief Executive. This item is really important because improving how we engage with our communities is absolutely fundamental to how we operate here at Hounslow. It's central to the One Hounslow approach that we've been developing and adopting, and central to our ambition to be an outstanding council serving an outstanding borough. This long-term aspiration that we have been working on for some time was heightened due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and this led to the One Hounslow Many Voices programme, which emerged from last summer's engagement review, which we carried out in conjunction with the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. Many councillors here took part in that, either individually or by attending workshops, and a session on that work was taken to area forums at the end of last year. So work has been continuing, and today we're here to update you on what's followed since then and where we are up to on our journey to improve consultation and engagement, the proposed next steps and new measures being brought in. There has been some really good engagement practice in the council over recent years. That was something that was identified in the review by CLES, but we also recognised that there were things that we needed to improve, and so there has been some work carried out since then towards that. We know that there's been some less successful engagement, that it sometimes has been inconsistent, and that it's not reached all areas or all of our communities equally. And that is certainly something that we want to change. So good engagement, listening to our communities, taking their needs on board has to be at the heart of what we do as a council. In order to do that, we need to create a culture whereby engagement is everyone's business. That means us as council members, that means officers. It's a part of all of our roles. So what we'd like to hear from you today, after we've presented, is what you think about the proposals, any other ideas you might have that could help us to get better engagement and community development. And I am appealing to you both in your role as Scrutiny Committee members, but also as individual ward members who know your communities. I know it's tempting sometimes to look back over what's happened, what might have gone wrong, and I have no problem with that. But what I think would be really helpful for this evening is if we could focus on the future, what you would like to see, what suggestions you can make for us to take forward. So I think that the IT has been sorted. So in that case, I'll hand over to Ben.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn. Yeah. Thanks for having us here, members. It's great that we're able to put these things here before you get your feedback on them. So as Councillor said, I'm Ben Knowles. I'm the Assistant Director for Communications, Public Affairs and Engagement. And I'm going to focus on talking about the One Hounslow Many Voices programme and the consultation engagement improvements that's coming through that. That was a programme that was launched tail end of last year, approved by Cabinet in December. And I thought it'd be quite helpful before we get on to some of the real practical things that we've done and that we're doing, just to set a bit of context and just remind those members who may not have been involved in the process, just how we got to this stage, so the journey that we've been on. So as Councillor Dunn said, the context we were in, that we knew we didn't reach all communities equally, and particularly voices missing from the BAME and younger residents of the borough. We were on a journey to improve engagement and some really good stuff around the Thriving Community strategy and good practice. But again, as Councillor Dunn said, it was sometimes inconsistent. And this particularly was highlighted, these disparities, during the pandemic, when we really needed to reach out to people. And it was particularly those people who were disproportionately affected, who historically we hadn't reached out to that well. So that really made us focus on how do we improve this, how do we improve it quickly. And you've just got a couple of graphics up there that just bring that to light a little bit. So one is the resident survey of 2018 that shows you, views on whether we listen to people, act on concerns, involve them in decisions, all kind of the 50% mark. And then we had a COVID survey in the summer where we wanted to speak to people, find out how COVID was affecting them and their families, what support we could give them, really important, so we could tailor our response. And we got a high, a good response rate, but as you can see from there, it wasn't representative of our demographics in the borough. So particularly younger people absent from that, and it wasn't representative of our BAME communities. So that's the context. But this slide also, we have a line there, continuous improvement, because I think it's important to make the point that we are on a journey, and throughout the past, 12 months, we have been making improvements where we can, learning from things that has happened over that time and insight we've got. So the final box at the bottom there, that shows you another survey we carried out in January, where again, was not ideal, it's not perfect representation of the borough, but what we did achieve is a much higher response rate in younger people, and also a much higher response rate in our BAME communities. So that's just to illustrate the fact, we have these points where we'll have a cabinet paper, we'll come to scrutiny, but throughout this journey, we're making improvements. That's a real tangible piece of one there. So the One Hounslow Many Voices programme, in 2020, we commissioned through the Community Recovery Board, the Centre for Local Economic Studies, to carry out that review. And its general scope was one of reviewing what we did already, sort of a paper-based audit of our strengths and weaknesses, who we reach, who we don't reach, what good will look like from the people in the borough, what they want to see, what we want to see as a council, what partners want to see, examples of good practice. And then the methodology, and again, I'm sure some of you are involved in this. So an evaluation of what we did already, the mechanisms we used, and then interviews, workshops, that's with council officers, with members, area forum chairs, a whole range of focus groups with individuals, grassroots organisations who perhaps we didn't traditionally connect to or felt they had limited contact with the council, and then mapping the partnerships that existed across the borough, old ones and new ones that rose up through COVID, to see how we could make the most of those. So what it found, lots of details, and hopefully you had a chance to look through it last year, and we shared it ahead of this as well. Very lengthy document, lots of stuff in there. What we do well, where we can improve, a whole raft of recommendations drawing on best practice from around the world, just to give us ideas. But the whole point of the review is actually, we don't take and drop something from somewhere else, but actually we come up with our own solutions for Hounslow and what works for the communities for Hounslow. So again, we need to capitalise on the communities that are already out there and what they're doing, because they are getting on with stuff and they're doing things, and we need to connect to that. And we need to build on the relationships that we developed during the pandemic and really amplifying the community voices. And it delivered a set of principles which we've now adopting throughout our communications and engagement, consultation engagement rather. So transparency. So these are things that came through from the listening exercise from Claire's, clearly communicating the purpose of consultations and the consequences of it, the willingness for uncomfortable conversation, so officers to be happy with that and create forums for that, involving communities from the start, so key part of one of the gunning principles around consultation, clearly linking what people respond and how they feed back to decision making, meeting the community where they are. So again, really important. It's been difficult through COVID, but that idea of you can't just expect people to come to you all the time, come to you physically or come to you through your channels. You need to go to them. Consider language, particularly around translation, working with people, not doing things to them, and looking at different softer methods to engagement as opposed to just, your formal written questionnaire or digital questionnaire, being flexible and understanding the importance of building relationships. And it also highlighted 5 key audiences where we needed, and we do still need, to do better. So that is our BAME residents, younger residents, so people under 30, white residents from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, transient populations, and digitally excluded residents. And they proposed a way forward, which was a 5-stage framework. So number 1 is that's taking stock. So thinking about where we are, what we've learned through the CLES review, and what we sort of knew already, and thinking about, okay, well, clearly we need to make community engagement a really high priority, and it's part of One Hounslow. So how do we do that? Then there's listening. So listening to what we heard back from the CLES review, listening to what our residents might tell us when we go out and speak to them, and then reflecting on that, reflecting what we hear. And so this is the stage we're in at the moment, is that taking stock, listening, reflecting. Then beyond that are co-producing local engagement mechanisms. So that is coming up with things jointly with residents, in their area. It could be just a neighbourhood area, it could be ward level, could be something else entirely. But it's something new that's co-produced with them where they can feed into the agenda, they can lead the discussions. And then finally, it's passing on the power, which is the really new stuff that we, needs to be developed. And that is where you come up with a mechanism whereby it isn't organised by the council, it's organised by the communities themselves. And they think about an issue, they choose the issue, they might think about the solution. It could look like many different ways, and we don't want to suggest what that might look like because that's part of this journey. So what's happening now? Part of what was agreed in the December Cabinet report was a work plan. So I'm just going to focus on the key parts of that work plan initially, and then I'm going to talk about the wider stuff that we're doing. So local conversations came out. So that is helping organisations locally to set up their own forums. So we've got 4 of those, developing now. So in Chiswick, Brentford and Isleworth, Heston, and then Felton, Bedfont and Hanworth. And so they're hopefully going to be started in the summer, possibly early autumn. We've got a piece around barriers to engagement. So that is how do you remove some of the barriers to engagement from those 5 groups, which I mentioned earlier. So we're commissioning a piece of work to look into that, to have proper deep dive into those communities to get their views. And what we want to get out of that are some really practical sort of advice and guidance for colleagues and for members, like cultural competency. So how do you speak to those organisations or those people rather? What language should you use? What mechanisms should you use that we can then sort of help inform colleagues and members with? Insight and data. So that's a piece of work that we're doing to how do we collate all the great data we've got into a useful form that then colleagues, members can use when they're trying to reach communities. The Ask the Experts programme. So we ask members, we've asked colleagues who live locally, who might know about a certain issue, know about an area, will they be willing to support us with consultation engagement exercises? And then developing the area forums, which is something Elliot is going to come on and talk to after this in a bit more detail around community development. So what other sort of products and processes are we bringing forward to support consultation? And to support it, give yourselves to give colleagues the tools and the know-how to do it really well. And so we're bringing in a new consultation toolkit that advises colleagues what to do, when to consult, how to consult, things to consider. We've got an offer of sort of expertise in the team, which we're developing, so people come and speak to us and get feedback on that. Workshops for members and staff, they'll be rolling out from next month, hopefully. And then consultation and equalities training. So, that's really important, the equalities piece, as we've just heard in the previous item. And we really need to embed that with people who are leading consultations. So there'll be training sessions around that, making sure when people do consultations, they have clear objectives about what they want to get out of them and how they're going to evaluate them and know whether it's successful or not and how they're going to learn from that. Developing our consultation platforms so they're more engaging, improving the section on the website around consultation engagement so people can come see how they can get involved, a consultation forward plan to join all this up, make sure it's coordinated, that we're not duplicating with colleagues across council or with other organisations, and that's something we want to make public when that's developed. And then finally, from me, is the wider engagement piece. So we've set up a community engagement network within the council. So that is officers who lead on consultation and engagement, particularly in different service areas, meeting, discussing what they're doing, sharing concerns, asking for ideas, best practice, making sure we're all joined up and consistent. More responsive surveys. So we do a biennial survey, as I'm sure you know, and we're going to do one this autumn. But we're also looking at, well, how do we commission those some more deep dive surveys? And some of the things that might come out of that might be things that we hear through, like we did with COVID, or we need to hear people like that, or it might be something that comes out of the biennial surveys. So let's really invest in some deep dive into certain communities or certain issues, helping communities with their own engagement, so similar sort of toolkits for them, embedding consultation and engagement as part of new starters when they join the organisation. So that's part of their training, if you like. Developing the tenant and leaseholder engagement. And we're also reviewing public representation on boards or committees or panels. So that's ourselves, that's also our partners. So we're doing that jointly with the ICP, try and ensure that we get a more representative number of voices on those panels, try and move away from there only perhaps being a smaller number of people who have been there for a long time, and we really value their opinion, but we know there are more voices out there. So how do we hear from them and make them part of our decision-making network? Engagement materials for new staff when they start. So that's it from myself. Now I'll hand you over to Elliot.
Thanks, Ben. Good evening, everyone. So as Ben's mentioned, really, we have for some time been looking at consultation and engagement and how we can do it better and it can feel better for residents. And some of you will remember that we did visit area forums last year to start talking about these ideas. During that series of visits to area forums and work we've been doing with the community, with our partners, whilst we've appreciated that we need to get consultation and engagement right and make it meaningful, we sort of sensed a bigger thing as well, and something a bit broader, which was around community development. So it's fine to have robust consultation and engagement, but what about when you're not necessarily wanting to talk to residents about specific issues, consultation and engagement, but actually it's about building the relationship and building the relationships within the community. And that's very much community development, almost the activity that goes around consultation and engagement all of the time. So we've been given some thought to how we can, I suppose, develop that going forward. And to reiterate what Councillor Dunn said a moment or two ago, today isn't about presenting any finished thinking or finding. It's very much the start of the conversation when it comes to community development. We spoke the tail end of last year about consultation and engagement, and Ben's been able to explain how we've progressed. This is very much at the start of what we could and would be able to do around community development if we all think together. So the starting point and the good part of this is that we're not starting from ground zero when it comes to community development. When I talk about the activities that go on and around consultation and engagement all of the time, we do quite a bit. So we obviously have our relationship with Ealing and Hounslow CVS, which and they are tasked with acting as, I suppose, our agents through our voluntary sector and making sure that we have a robust voluntary sector that all get a voice around the table at the important times. However, we don't just leave it to Ealing and Hounslow CVS. We also have our own relationships with voluntary sector organisations, be them the well-established larger organisations in the borough or the really new smaller groups that maybe don't have as loud a voice. We do have really strong links through our team, but also through members of staff from other services and from councillors. So we feel that actually the council does have a strong relationship with its voluntary sector. Some of you will know we are doing a review of the council's community assets. Hopefully you remember some of the virtual ward walkabouts that we held a number of weeks ago, which were primarily around community assets in and around the areas where you are, but actually turned into much broader conversations that just gave us a wealth of information about what is going on out there in the local wards, in our community, that we can tap into in this area. We have obviously the Thriving Communities Fund, which has been a really great success since that was brought together a couple of years ago. We've been able to help so many community groups, which in turn has led to so many residents being helped. All aspects of life around, whether it's from mental health, whether it's from sporting activity, whether it's from the arts. It's been, I think we would all agree, a resounding success. And you'll probably remember a report that went to the last cabinet, which really summed up that everything had been done through the year of recovery with the Thriving Communities Fund. So we really need to develop that further. Volunteering in the borough, really strong. Through the pandemic, it just blew up in terms of how many people put themselves forward for volunteering, and that hasn't dropped off in the significant amounts which we expected. There's a real appetite there for people to get involved in their local community on a volunteering basis, and also what's been just amazing is within the council's workforce itself, and councillors who put themselves forward to volunteer through the pandemic and are still keen to do so. And then we've talked about area forums. Obviously, they are and can be even further the main vehicle for community development. We do need to look at them going forward. How can they really work in terms of an opportunity for members, for the council, for residents, for partners, the voluntary sector, to really get involved in that local level at the area they represent. So community development covers all those areas and more, and to really, I suppose, make sure that when we come round to engage and consult, actually the community and our partners are used to working with us, they're used to talking to us, and actually when we consult and engage, it becomes more meaningful. You'll remember that last year, at the same time as we did when we carried out a review of how we consult and engage, we also carried out a review of our relationship and how we work with the voluntary sector during the early stages of the pandemic. An organisation called Rocket Science joined us for a number of weeks and worked alongside us in our work with the voluntary sector, and they proved really invaluable in terms of some I suppose, expert additional eyes looking at how we work. We did that piece of work with, I suppose, a mind to lots of other pieces of work that had either been done or were going on. So things like the borough's recovery plan, the Thriving Community Strategy that was agreed a couple of years ago, but luckily, actually, it really did feel relevant and fresh when we came to the pandemic and working with our community. The council's new corporate plan, the community solutions. Some of you will know already, or hopefully you're aware that has been alluded to tonight. We are developing the community hub into community solutions to really offer that support and guidance for residents at a really early stage from a preventative aspect, so their problems don't then become acute down the line and have to present themselves at the council with really expensive, complex situations. We're intervening early. If we want that model to work, it relies very much on a robust voluntary sector being able to help residents where they need support, when they need support. One Hounslow. Obviously, community development is the embodiment of One Hounslow, because it's not just about the council, it's actually about the borough as a whole. All of our partners working alongside us and us working alongside them to deliver better outcomes for residents. And then the final part that we're paying reference to when we look at community development is the new digital platform that's been developed called Hounslow Connect. So this will be a platform which will enable residents to connect with voluntary sector organisations in and around where they live quickly, understand what level of support they'll be able to find from these organisations to really help them solve their problems within the community together before things, like I've said before things escalate and become really complex. So the review that we carried out actually came out with some clear recommendations about how we should move forward. Whilst they recognised that actually we did have a strong relationship with the voluntary sector, and that was evident through the pandemic, they said it could be better. It could be more strategic, and it could, I suppose, pay better reference to some of the smaller organisations. They could see the strong relationships we have with the traditionally established groups in the borough, but they said there was a place really for some different relationships with different types of groups that have popped up during the pandemic. the report really urged us to co-design solutions with the voluntary sector rather than working on our own, thinking up the solutions and then inviting the voluntary sector to the table. They said, you really get them in early, something like community solutions if they're going to be key, and what you say is correct, that they are key to it going forward. Actually get them in at the design stage, which we've done. And that really is about partnering with the voluntary sector to put One Hounslow into practice. One Hounslow is now established within the council. We need to make sure it gets established out there with our partners into the borough, so everyone buys into the One Hounslow ethos. Coming back to community solutions, like I've said, we've actually got the voluntary sector around the table in our design team for community solutions. They know what problems residents are coming to them with that the council doesn't even see, so they can understand what kind of interventions are needed, when and where and how. So, not everyone needs the same solution in each part of the borough. There are different issues which have become apparent through the pandemic which are affecting different groups of residents in different parts of the borough, whether that's financial inclusion, whether that's mental health, whether that's loneliness, whether that's food poverty. It hasn't been the same picture all over the borough. So we need to make sure that actually with our voluntary sector, we have coverage of all types of solutions in all areas of the borough where it's needed. And then finally, and last but not least, I would say a closer working relationship with councillors and their communities. And when I say that, it's more about actually how do we take advantage of the relationships that our councillors have in their communities, both through the CLES report and the rocket science report that we commissioned last year. Both identified strong relationships and evidence of councillors really understanding their communities, but then us not quite being able to demonstrate how that turns then into action. So we really need to build those mechanisms where that happens. So some of the ideas around how we think we might do this, and I'll try and go through these quickly because I know we want to save some time for some ideas and questions. So we've talked about embedding a community development approach about what we do. And what that really means is we need to be out and about and we need to be visible in the community. So we need to change some of our work, change the way we work, less work behind the desk, more work out there in the community, talking to people, understanding what's going on. It was really refreshing to get out and about. I took part in a door knocking exercise on the Ivory Bridge estate a few weeks ago, and one of the best things to hear on that day was actually people talking about community spirit, that had clearly grown again during the pandemic, and we need to build on that. Keeping it local. Ben mentioned the local conversations. We need to, I think, stop inviting residents somewhere central to come and have a conversation with us about things. We need to go to where they're already connected, talk about what they want to talk about, where they want to talk about it, talk to groups that work with residents. Not all the conversations have to be led by the council. We need to tap into conversations already taking place. We need to explore the potential of participative grant making and widen the access to funding. This really comes back to the piece that whilst the Thriving Communities Fund has been a real success, we need to make sure that we're not just funding the same groups through every cycle, that actually new groups, smaller groups are getting the chance to grow and having access to this money. We've talked about it, we need to make best use of our community assets. We've done a huge piece of work, really. The communities team and the asset management team working together to work out where all our community assets are and who is using them, how they're using them, when they're using them. And now we do have an understanding of what capacity and perhaps gaps there are that could be filled with organisations who maybe only need a space once or twice a week. They don't need it full time, and we've been able to highlight opportunities such as that. We talked about maximising opportunities for volunteering and social action. There was a real appetite through the pandemic. We need to build on that and make sure that when people put themselves forward for volunteering, that we have the opportunities to match them quite quickly. We talked about, I won't go on, but we've talked about VCSE engagement in delivering community solutions, area forums. We need to work, this really is the start of the conversation. We need to work with area forums to understand what is the potential of them, what could they be, how could they work to really make them something dynamic and really special I think, in Hounslow. We need to make sure that actually we have conversations in each of the areas which are relevant to that area. It shouldn't just be the case of an officer wants to consult, so they take a paper. It should actually be, because of the community development we're doing all through the year, we know what the issues are in each of the areas, so we take things that are relevant to that area, or we hear from the community about what's relevant for that area, or we hear from our voluntary sector partners in that area what's relevant, and we're able to shape agendas and events in those areas that actually mean something. We make commitments, we have the conversations, and we go back and we say what's happened. So rather than just standalone events, which area forums sometimes can feel, we need to make sure that they are really opportunities for engagement and interaction with the community. We've touched on a couple of times this evening around supporting the role of councillors to be community leaders. You'll hopefully know about the Your Neighbourhood grant, which is a section of the Thriving Communities Fund, which has been earmarked for ward councillors to have access to, for ideas and initiatives that are very local, grassroots initiatives in and around the areas they represent. And we really do think that even though relatively small amounts of money, it should be able to have a big impact on people's lives, and actually seeing the connection between, I suppose, local councillors, the council and residents. And then all this really is working towards us, I suppose, getting real co-design with the community and the borough as a whole into the next version of the Thriving Community Strategy. Whilst not due until 2023, will soon be upon us, and we will need to start work on that in the latter part of this year. So just finally, really, to sum up, and it's a bit about both of what Ben and I have been talking about. There are lots of stages of community development, engagement and consultation and working with residents. And it can really be broken down into the 6 stages of, informing, consulting, engaging, involving, collaborating and empowering. We probably do some of those really well, some of them not so well. And you could argue that there's a couple that we probably haven't touched the sides yet. And so this is a journey that we are on. We want to get better at. It's about coming this evening to get ideas and thoughts, but we would really like to be at the stage where we really are having effective engagement, involvement, collaborating with residents, and then in some instances where it's appropriate, really empowering residents to take initiatives, passing on the power to live the Hounslow values and delivering outcomes for themselves, really local to where they are. So I understand it's a lot to take in this evening. We did obviously circulate some background papers for reading, but I think obviously myself, Councillor Dunn and Ben are happy to hear your thoughts on what we've been through this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn, Elliot, and Ben. Sorry, I'm calling you Bell. That was a very detailed presentation. Would anybody like to start off with some questions, please? Councillor Foote and then Councillor Akanzada.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm a bit concerned because I've heard these sort of comments previously. And in recent times, in the recent months, I've been hearing that Hamworth is the most deprived ward in the borough. I and my fellow councillors in Hamworth have been telling Hounslow Council this is a fact for the last 5 years, and we've been ignored. But suddenly it becomes, the right thing to say. I've seen resources that have been disappearing out of Hamworth. Community centre, youth centre, disappearing out of Hamworth. No resources going back in again. I attended a meeting in Feltham about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago, where plans for the Feltham area were shown on a map. Hamworth didn't even appear on the map. It wasn't there. It was the boundaries stopped somewhere in the middle of Hamworth Park. This is the situation where that's factors as it is on the ground at the moment. You've talked about voluntary services. I've seen voluntary sector getting involved in there. They've turned away and walked away as being too difficult. they're the sort of circumstances we've had. We've got some, there are areas where we have massive problems. If you just look at, and, Ivy Bridge has its problems, but Ivy Bridge has a community centre, a thriving community centre, which, works. None of that appears in Hamworth. So, you have to look at some of the areas around and look at them deeply as to what the real problems are. And it would be nice if councillors from the areas were listened to. That's not been my experience. We've been ignored. I brought plans forward into planning and to the strategic planning group 4 years ago. Those plans have just not materialised. They're not, nothing's happened. We went all around the borough, around the ward, taking photographs, brick walls that are falling over and are still falling over, work that's not done. It's just little things that just aren't done. They're not even expensive things, but it's just not happening. And that is not good enough. And I'm sorry if I sound, somewhat unaffected by what you've said you're going to do. I keep hearing about the voluntary sector, and frankly, until we can solve our own problems, the voluntary sector won't do nothing for it.
Hear, hear.
Then if you'd like to respond. Yeah.
I will, Chair. Just a couple of things that I just wanted to use in response. I think, first of all, I acknowledge what you're saying, but what I would really like to say is that we are listening at the moment. I mentioned the virtual ward walkabouts which we carried out recently. Now they were great and they were useful, and we've got a whole, a wealth of information that's come back that we will be producing a report for that members will see. However, the next version of those walkabouts won't be virtual, and we are going to get out and about with members to have a proper look around. I come from a housing background, and we did lots of walkabouts, but actually we only did walkabouts on housing estates, but actually the rest of the borough needs to experience that as well. So we will, with community development, we are investing resources into this area, and we are going to be listening, and we are going to be acting on what we say and hear what going forward from residents and from councillors. A second part, Chair, is that with community solutions, one of the key principles of community solutions is that we will follow the data and insight. So where we do see certain areas in the borough which are experiencing challenges or more deprived than others, that's where we hope to go, and we will look to go with our interventions. And that will be with the voluntary sector sometimes, because actually they could be and should be the right agencies to deliver some of those interventions. Finally, just in terms of, I suppose, the borough-wide issues, one of the pieces of work that we've been doing lately, and we can share with members, we just need to find the right place and I suppose audience to do that, is that the Thriving Communities Fund has actually achieved quite a lot of successful borough coverage. One of the reasons why it was set up is that there were concerns that certain areas of the borough got all the investment. And actually, we wanted to make sure that when voluntary sector organisations put forward their proposals for consideration, we were taking into consideration which areas of the borough they were operating in and where the investment was going. So we've been able to, we've got some quite useful maps that do demonstrate, actually, whilst it's not perfect, it's certainly better than it was in terms of the borough coverage for the investment through the Thriving Communities Fund. So I do take on board, and I'm sure we all do, the comments made, but it is something that we will look to make strides on.
Okay, Councillor Canzada and then Councillor Luki.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I would like to thank and appreciate the hard work of Councillor Dunn and her team, especially to work on this subject, because during the pandemic, we have realized that how much important it is to engage with the community and bring the community together so we can achieve more by that. So thank you very much for bringing this on and working on this very important subject. But one thing, going through the data which you have shared today with us, the most important thing is that we need to work more on our youth, because that is our coming generation. We need to work more to engage them more. And the second area which was lacking was BME community. So now we need to change our methodology of engaging with them, come up with something new, so we make them comfortable to come forward, share their experiences, share their concerns, so we can improve or these engagement and improve how to make the community more together to work as a community. And so that's my two concern, that we need to kind of change our methodology to engage the youth more and the other communities, so that we can achieve more by, and we will have data to work on while we get the feedback from them. Thank you.
Sorry, Ben, and then Councillor Dunn.
Yes, thank you for that. And you're completely right. Yeah, younger people, particularly, we need to engage more with. And there are various projects in development around that, including we're working up with colleagues in the Children and Young People Division for a big, probably borough-wide engagement exercise with young people over the next few months. That's still in development, but we're looking at doing something really big, really ambitious around that. But actually, I think it'd be a good opportunity as well to talk very briefly just about an example about how we are changing how we do that. So a recent engagement exercise we ran through the team around sort of planning and development was on high streets visioning recently. So taking plans through different areas to get people's views on these are possible proposals, places like Chiswick, the town centres, Brentford, and so on. From that initially were the voices of younger people. So what they did, actually, they took a different approach than what they had been doing, and actually went into schools, and they took the proposals into schools, and they produced a video to play to the class, and they gave tools to the teachers to explain what the proposals were, and then through sort of software they could use on their computers, asked young people then, knowing what the council was proposing and the ideas they wanted to hear back, well, what do you think about that? And actually across 5 senior schools, they got about 200 pupils to respond, which for something like that is really good to get like proper young people's voice into that. So that's just a small example there of the sort of thing actually we're doing. We're asking ourselves the challenging questions when we get the data back. Well, who's missing? Young people, right, well, let's go there. You know, and Elliot spoke to, we need to go to where they are. That's what they did as best they could sort of virtually. So you're right, that is something we need to get better at. We're also, you know, getting better connections with young people through our communications channels as well. There's a whole piece around that. But with engagement, it is a focus, and we're looking to do something quite big on it later this year.
Thank you for that, Ben. Actually, I mean, sort of reiterating what you said, I was going to suggest that actually schools are the way forward, and also social media. You know, we know every single young person, I don't know from what age, but definitely secondary level, are all on social media, whether that's TikTok, Snapchat, Insta, I don't know, whatever else they're using, Facebook maybe. And I think that's an area that we really do need to look at, how we can interact with them through social media. Yeah, anybody else? Oh, Councillor Lukey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, officers and Councillor Dunn. One thing is good news to me of your local forums that were mentioned earlier, and perhaps a little bit more information on that would be useful. And also your or unless you were talking about the area forums, which if we do want to have a bit more engagement via area forums, let's have more than 3 in this municipal year. The delay that we're not going to get one until until November, I think that's quite cheeky. Not really discussed with anybody else. So happy to bring one forward in Isleworth and Brentford area if any officers listening want to organise one. I'm happy to chair one. And I'm sure my counterparts in other in other areas will do the same, because it's all right talking about doing it via the area forums, but if we're not going to have area forums, you know, what's the point? And in Isleworth and Brentford area forums, we do pride ourselves on bringing people to the area forums, such as Thames Water will be coming to the next one, let me tell you. For example, and Councillor Shaheen's just gone, but he is one of our liaison councillors with Thames Water. That's you know, tell us a bit more about that at some point, or share us with it, share it with us, and also the work with the schools. Yeah, news to me. You've had 200 kids taking part. News to us. What are we discussing? You know, what schools took part? Yeah, are you going to share that feedback on what subjects? Are you going to promote that in Hounslow Matters, or is it going to be you know, a single person edition again next time? The one that one of the things that always concerns me is who owns the residence. I've noticed it over the years, and I think it still goes on. Who owns the housing tenants? Who owns people that live on housing estates? Is it just is it the housing department? Do they call the shots? How can we kind of break away from that that ownership, if you like, and that paternalism that you get, that just the housing department can talk to housing tenants? How's that going to work in this new in this new setup? And the same way with schools talking to children. How are we dealing with housing associations? How are we bringing them in? Because they're their own little fiefdoms, and there is a lot of trouble on housing association estates. And sometimes we feel that the authority doesn't want to rock the boat with its so-called partners in housing associations, when a lot of the people there, whether they're tenants, whether they're shared owners, leaseholders, don't get a really good deal, don't get the deal that they were sold their pups on. So how are we going to work with those guys? How are we going to work with the sports organisations? I know we do have the C-SPAN, the Community Sports Partnership Network, in Hounslow, and we've just got one sports development officer for the whole borough. You know, we're very lean, but she does a very good job in bringing people together and bringing London sports together. But how do we, how do we engage with our sports organisations in order to avoid debacles like the recent Green Lanes episode? You know, where do we start talking to people before things go wrong? That's the case. And when do we engage people in advance for in matters like that? What do we how are we working with our health authorities? We've had a spate of developments. We're going to have a lot of developments going on. Where is the where are the local people making input to the health needs of the London Borough of Hounslow, particularly in the new areas? These are the things I would like you, and I do value. Well, one of the things I do value is when we did have the virtual walkabout in Osterley and Spring Grove Ward, and Councillor Unsa Chowdhury and I took part in that with members of staff, and it was good that we had one member of staff, council staff, that does live locally and knew what we were talking about as well. So that was interesting. But one of the things that we were out there identifying in our ward, and I would imagine it would be the same in others. And I don't know if that something like that did actually take place in Hanworth Ward. But when one of the things that will worry me, does worry me when we're talking about council assets in our wards. How we stick our heads above the parapet with those council assets that might be underused at the moment. When are they going to be swiped for development by greedy by greedy developers or developer friends of in certain areas. So look, these are the things that we would be concerned about. I don't know. Yeah, it's not really a question, to be honest, because it's yeah. Some might call it a wee rant, and it's not a rant. But this is how we see it. A lot of us see it, whether it's as councillors, to one extreme from. I'm not saying we're the most affluent ward, but we are the greenest ward. We are the biggest ward in the borough in Oxley and Spring Grove. If you do talk about Hamworth, and I had the privilege for 2 years of being mayor and being able to visit parts of the borough that I'd never visited before, and I do see shortfalls in council services in all parts. In all parts of the borough, in all 20 wards, east to west. Where some people don't take or pay attention, whether it's council officers or councillors. How are we going to kind of level up a little bit more in those cases? That's it, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any replies?
Sure. Yeah. I was going to come in before. It's all right. I mean, don't apologise for not asking a question, Tony. I'm not really wanting questions. I'm wanting suggestions, and I will take your rant as a list of suggestions, because there was plenty of good stuff in there. Yes, Javed. Youth. The youth and also ethnic minority communities. Again. Both of those, as we've said, we want to engage more. There is work being done there has been a working group on inequalities, which has looked in particular at racial inequalities, but other inequalities as well, and has identified ways of firstly identifying those, and that's what Richard was talking about in terms of having identified which parts of the borough do need more attention in order to make things more equal. That's something I don't know that we've got a date for that yet, but we are planning a members session to show everyone where we've got to with that, the new tools that are available to members, and the input we would like from members in order to develop that. So again, please, any suggestions you have for engaging different parts of the community, whether it's schools, young people or whatever, then it's all very welcome.
Thank you. Would Councillor Mashisho like to speak, and then Councillor Tuck, and okay, the other way around, and then Councillor Bidoff, please.
Thank you, Chair. I saw in the presentation one of the principles being clearly linked to power on influence over a decision. I've often seen this not being the case. When people do respond to some of the consultations, they give their opinion, and at the later stage, they feel that their opinions are not considered. How are we going to ensure that this does not happen? This has been the case, like Councillor Foote also said, that he has been saying some suggestions for so long and has been ignored. Most people get disheartened after you ignore them once or twice or thrice. They don't respond to the consultation. How are we going to ensure that this does not happen? I have another question, if I may ask, Chair. This is around the surveys. When we send a survey, how do we design the possible options in the survey? Are these the options that we are planning to implement, or are the options we are looking from people, what they actually want? Thank you.
Yeah, Oh, sorry, Councillor Dunn, did you want to come in?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think obviously I'm not to take the second one first. I'm not sure what surveys you talk. Do you mean consultations? Yes. Okay. So there are certain rules around and principles around consultations, and if we put out options to people, then that would have to be options that we have considered and feel able to implement. And we're looking for people's opinions on what they think of them, and which ones they might prefer, and why. In terms of how we're going to make sure people don't feel ignored, that's obviously very important. It's important that we do follow up after consultations to ensure that people understand why certain decisions have been taken. Obviously, I can't guarantee that we'll make everyone happy, because we will get opposing views coming back. And so, some people are going to be happy and some people aren't. But I think what's important is that we are very open about how and why we take particular decisions, how we considered results and opinions that came in from a consultation, and how that influenced the final decision.
Can I ask a supplementary?
Yeah.
It's regarding the consultation options that we sent. You say you've considered some options, and those are the options given to the residents for the consultation. In my opinion, that's not correct. If you give a person a choice, how would you want to die? With a knife or poison? And don't give them a third choice, would you want to live? It's not the right
if
options.
we have to kill someone, there's no point us telling them that they can live. Being serious now, so there are rules around consultations, and we can't give people options that the council can't implement. We can talk about much broader options and what people might like, and then about whether that's feasible or not at an earlier stage, at the engagement stage, because that doesn't come under the same rules around consultation. But when we consult, we do have a duty to only consult on options that we feel we can actually implement.
So it's not what the residents want, what we feel we can implement.
Well, obviously we have to be realistic, Councillor. I mean, as I said, at an earlier stage, you can have much broader conversations. You can think about what would we like, what would residents like, how, and at some point you have to refine that down to a set of options that are feasible.
Okay, Councillor Mashisho, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that presentation, Ben and Elliot. It was really good. I'm a big advocate for the findings that you initially produced at the area forum for us, and I've been talking about that for a while now with my constituents as well and my colleagues. The ward walkabouts was good, and I'm looking forward to seeing, a physical one. I think we had a physical one when we first got elected, Councillor Bidoff and I. But when I look at the research that you're producing here, I can't help but think about the Localism Act 2011, which was introduced to give power back to the people, so to speak. And somehow over these years, we've kind of gone away from that. And if it takes a report like this, a very substantial bureaucratic report to tell us how to give power back to the people, then something seriously has gone wrong. So I disagree with the councillor about there isn't really a lot that has gone wrong. The reason why we have to support is because there are issues with our consultation. There are issues about the way we engage with residents. There are issues about the way this council operates at the street level. So that's why we have to support. So we can't hide from that. You shake your head, but that's exactly why we have to support. I can't see anyone refuting that. Okay, moving on to my other point. We look at BAME and young people and so on. First thing that we understand is when you put the phrase BAME versus white, that all-encompassing phrase is really disrespectful in my view. But also, the other thing is when you say white, does that include Eastern European white, those who cannot perhaps speak the language or read the language as well? Are you consulting those? So perhaps if we're going to do white, let's think about our Polish friends, our Romanian friends, who are not, I can assure you, are not engaged in this consultation purely on language barrier reasons. And when it comes to the BAME communities as well, as you call it, let me call it Black, Asian, and mixed ethnic grouping. I think that the pandemic has shown that the areas to engage these groups are the faith group places, the churches, and just to show you where this council is on that very issue, Councillor Khan, our transport guru, put out a video asking for those in Black, mixed, ethnic minority groups to go and get a vaccine. He didn't have a Black person in it. So it just goes to show you how out of touch we are with our minority groups on those issues. And my final point is about behavioral psychology. When you speak to, and this is a recommendation for you, Councillor Dunn, perhaps I think this is where we might find some agreement. When you're speaking with people, often they won't tell you what they're really feeling. They'll tell you what they want to say, but the real feel of their work, of their the way they feel about something might not be evident. So you need to see the way they behave to the stimulus that you've provided. So that often should give you the insight. It's not what they tell you, it's how they feel about what's been implemented or what's being given to them. So this is where I believe the report perhaps need to add something into it when we talk about insights, is let's see what the actual behavior is from some of this small implementation that we're putting through. What is a behavior pattern? That tells you what they're feeling, not what reports or what details are being given to you or what tick box or consultation essay that is being advised by them. So to conclude, we don't have a strong relationship with voluntary groups. I know that because I work with a numerous amount of voluntary groups who do not or have not been able to access any of the fundings in this borough. So I agree with Councillor Foote that many areas have been ignored. And you know what, Councillor Foote, so has people in my ward in Chiswick too. We have council estates there with residents there who have no idea that they could speak to one of the councillors and we can fix the fences around their parameters. They have no idea. They have no idea. So the relationship is not there and it has never been there. And since 2011, it should have been there and we haven't acted. I welcome the access to funding. I think this would be a nice solution. Again, when you look at the behavior after this funding has been accessed, then we might say, well, actually, maybe it does work. Maybe we can speak to the smaller groups. It seemed to me that a medium-sized voluntary organization has better access to Hounslow in workings of the mechanism than an individual. So if an individual has an idea, there's no way they can get funding. No way. They're just not big enough. We need to be more flexible so that we can be adaptable to the changes of our community. And our community is changing. People don't speak English. Not all of them. People are not all old. They're not all young. There's a mixture. So we need to be dynamic in how we deal with our residents. And I guess the closing remark is that the area forum is probably one of those areas where perhaps Councillor Biddulph and I might disagree on this one, but perhaps this is where we can start to make some initial changes, but really we need people on the ground. We need officers out of the office and out on the ground. We need councillors on the ground doing the casework, but we also need to communicate, use social media, and make sure that people know that this council is there to serve them, not us, not residents serving the council. And that's what it seems to me at the moment. Through council tax going up, it seems as though residents are just serving the council. So can we change that around? And I think if we can do anything from those remarks, it will be quite helpful.
Ben, do you want to respond to? Sorry, just because you had your light on.
Oh, sorry, I've just left it on for convenience. Is that maybe?
Okay.
No, I'm more than happy to. I think lots of things to unpack there and lots of good points. And I'm glad you used the phrase dynamics. Actually, that is what we need to become with our engagement processes. And we're not yet, but we know that, and we're on that journey, hopefully. And when you talk about giving power back to the people, that is ultimately what we're trying to achieve through this. Obviously, it ends with passing on the power. But it's a challenge, and it will take a while to get there. And I think also you mentioned BAME and white on the slides, and that was a crude slide in regards to just for simplicity using that. Of course, in the data, you can drill down into the different demographics. It did include white English, white non-English. But I think there is a bigger point there actually about BAME, which you raised, which just is a term in general, and something we're fully aware of, is it is too crude just to talk about that group as if it's one group. And so if we do it for convenience, I think we need to challenge ourselves on the use of that actually. And part of the work we're doing when we look at the barriers is exactly that, breaking down BAME into different demographics, because of course they're really different in all sorts of ways. So we need to think, how are we going to reach those groups in a way that means something to them? So those points are noted, and I like to think we're on that, and that's the way we're progressing. That's the journey we're on. And on vaccination videos, yes, we weren't great initially in get representation. We worked a lot harder, and then over more recent months, we did get far more diversity in all of our COVID comms, I think. And I think you yourself actually did one for us, which is brilliant, and exactly the sort of thing that we sort of need members to do for us. So that, I guess that's just some responses from me to the points that you raised.
Did you want to speak?
Just a quick follow-up, if that's okay. You also mentioned, Councillor Mashisho, around the, at the moment, the frustration, I think, around individuals being able to access council funding when they have ideas. And I think this is exactly why the Your Neighbourhood grant has been brought in, because actually we're well aware, and this is something that I know Councillor Dunn feels passionate about, and when it was raised, is that councillors know about these ideas, know about individuals often in and around where they work, and actually this is exactly to do that. So it's to take an element of the funding away from the traditional allocation through voluntary sector organisations, where people have that nugget of idea. They can speak to their local councillor, speak to the council about trying to develop it and running with it, and make it happen quickly. That will be the key. There won't be some long, drawn-out administration behind this. The ideas will be looked at quickly. If people are supportive, local councillor, we'll get the resources to those individuals and groups of people that don't have to be an established group or an established organisation. So it was something that was spotted and that's been acted on, excuse me, relatively quickly.
Right, Councillor Biddulph and then Councillor Akinzada, and then no more questions, because I think we need to sort of start wrapping this up. Yes, Catherine.
Sorry, would it just be okay to come in briefly on funding? So I think our relationship with the voluntary sector goes beyond funding. So I think it's really important that we build strong relationships that are not just about whether we're able to fund them, because the reality is that we don't have very much money at all for funding the voluntary sector. Exactly. However, we're talking about groups, community groups and individuals and so on in terms of accessing funding. I mean, I don't think it's true to say that small groups or individuals are not able to access funding. There certainly there's been a long tradition of small grants in this council, which are now been wrapped into the Thriving Communities Fund. What I will say is that there's been certain groups who were in the know and were able to access funding. It's sort of year after year, and now we're looking to change that. Not to say to people you can't apply anymore, but that we're really looking to reach out beyond the groups that perhaps were in the know before. We of course need councillors to help us do that, and we need to make sure that councillors have that information in order to be able to do that. So that's just on that. I agree we need to be more diverse, represent a more diverse community in our communications. I think it's a little unfair to pick on Councillor Khan, who produced a video made by Labour councillors, at least one of which did include a black person. Yes.
No, it did not.
Well, I think Councillor Atherton might have something to say about that.
It did not. She was not on it.
Chair, would you like me to say something on this?
Yes. Was she on it? I can't remember.
So I've produced numerous videos. There's countless videos that have included people from Black, Asian, minority, ethnic communities. And if Councillor Moshisho is isolating one video that was produced, then maybe that could be the case. So, but I think it will be unfair to just isolate one video when you can consider that I've produced a number of videos that include many people from the Black community. So I think it's a bit rich to say what you said. Thank you.
How is it rich if you just admitted it? How is it rich?
Okay, can we just sort of end it there, because we really have another topic, if you don't mind, that's going to take up a long time. So, yeah, Councillor Moshisho. Councillor Bidoff, are you ready to
I am,
speak?
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. If it's all right, I'd like to make some comments about the presentation and then move on to the consultation document itself, if that would be okay. You've made some really significant points throughout here, which I think deserve greater scrutiny. You're talking about reaching young people, and obviously they are residents and need to be included in consultations, but how do you define them? What age groups are you looking at? And how are you going to survey them? The Market Research Society has very clear regulations about how children should be surveyed, consulted. Those must be followed. And I know that some parents will not allow their children to be interviewed on any subject without a parent being present. So you're immediately going to limit who you ask, and it does need to be representative. And that's a theme that runs through all of the consultation points that I'm going to make. They must be representative, and there's not any evidence so far that what has been done has been representative on any issue. I'm not talking about the loaded issue that is coming up later. I'm talking about it across the piece. So that has to be borne in mind, and I would like to know, you may not want to answer this straight away, but in terms of loading questions, which was the point that Councillor Tack was bringing up, they have been loaded in almost every consultation that we've had on Chiswick issues. They were loaded in the High Street survey that you mentioned, which was not representative. So would you use commonplace again? Because that was the most discredited format used throughout the consultations in Chiswick. All the questions were loaded. You had to, and if you commented on the free-flowing boxes, rather than just picking the few options that you had, those comments were disregarded. That cannot happen again. That has no place in any consultation and engagement exercise that you do in any way. If you do it, it's going to be rubbished by an awful lot of people. You've talked about ward forums. I'm the new chairman of the Chiswick Area Forum. Nobody has spoken to me. So yet again, I'm being done to, which is a feeling that residents have, that we're all being done to by Hounslow. I have got ideas for the Area Forum. I've been developing them as I've watched the Area Forums carry on for the 2 years when they happened, and the 1 year when they could have happened virtually, which a lot of people were doing. And we've spent a whole year not having area forums virtually during the pandemic. You can shake your head and look quizzical, but that's a fact. The area forum has not met during the pandemic. The Chiswick Area Forum, sorry? Not the Chiswick Area Forum. We have not had an area forum. We have not had an area forum during the pandemic. We have not had a virtual, we have not
Could
had.
we just carry on, please?
Chaspal can confirm that. Perhaps we had one at the very beginning, but we haven't had one during the pandemic when we could have gone virtual. And I've raised my ideas with Chaspal, and it's always, these are the dates you can hold them on, full stop. There's no negotiation.
Councillor Bidoff, can I just ask you again, can we just leave that point, please, and get on? Because
I didn't hear you say that. I didn't hear you say that in terms of area forums. So the point is, please involve the chairs of area forums in the discussions about how the area forums could evolve, because I've got some ideas that I think would work in Chiswick. They might not work anywhere else, but they would work with us. On the high streets point, I've just said that wasn't representative. Very few traders, I think a couple might have been along to the high street surveys that you did. They won't come along at the time of day that you organise them. They won't come along unless they're given a specific reason and a benefit to spend their hard-earned time joining in. But we have to include business ratepayers. We've had a lot of conversation, a lot of mention of residents here, but we have ratepayers who pay huge amounts of money when rates are being paid into Chiswick's, into Hounslow's coffers, and they have to be taken on board and included in consultations. So I've mentioned the doing to us. There's also the aspect of don't interfere. I really endorse what Councillor Foote said at the beginning. It's been a response of nearly all all the councillors I've talked to, that this consultation cuts out councillors, doesn't recognise that we are already, to use the word again that Ron used, we're already dynamic. Good, active councillors are already dynamic. We're already proactive. We're already making links with our local groups. We know them well. We're not just going along to say hello at the AGMs. We're helping them, getting involved and helping them get direction. And that's what we're known for. So please recognise that councillors are not to be excluded. We are the elected representatives, and we should be borne in mind the whole time. You've talked about things like supporting organisations and providing funding to them. I think written into this, it has to be clear that this is non-partisan, because I see funds going to the same organisations over and over again because they support your agenda, and they must go to other groups who apply. There's a huge range of issues that need to be thought about. Community assets, that was a good conversation. The ward about was actually Ron's idea. He suggested that idea, and that was taken up by you. And you may not agree with that. That is how it happened. But frankly, not just me, but others have been really surprised that officers have so little information about the wards they are supposed to be supporting and working for. And I think that's embarrassing. We produced a culture compendium to fit in with your Borough of Culture bid, totally ignored. It was a huge resource, listing an awful lot of things that go on in Chiswick. And the same with the wardabouts. We shouldn't have to say, we've got a town hall, we've got a library, we've got 4 open spaces, we've got a nature reserve, we've got some allotments. We shouldn't have to say that. That should be known. Some basic research could have been done. And I reckon that there are people who are not being asked in the council who have that information. I'm sitting right opposite somebody who will have a lot of information, whether Chaspal knows it or not, by going to the events that the things that she supports. There are people in this council who have information, and I think you're just asking too narrow a group, and obviously ask us as well. So we are the elected representatives. I'm very, very concerned about things being representative generally. Moving on to this 59-page document, is it? With a section, first of all, I should say, I think everybody needs to know, if they don't already, that CLES has as one of its trustees Niall Bolger, who is our chief executive. I do think that needs to be recorded. Okay. There is a link there potentially. I'm very interested in the section Appendix 2, examples of good practice within Hounslow, and I am going to score a point here. CS9, C9, C9T are not examples of good practice, and you need to bear that in mind. There needs to be a page on bad practice. You haven't acknowledged mistakes, and I do think that's fundamentally important. So when I first looked at this, I just had to look around at what I had in my heaps at home, and it's a point that's been made earlier. We have a consultation charter. We have a whole page on consultations. We've got pages on engagement and consultation about Hounslow street space. We've got all these documents that we've had there as things to guide the work of the borough, of the council, and they've not been paid attention to. What's to say that anything better is going to happen as a result of this 59-page document? I'm not convinced, and nor are residents. I asked a few for their comments on this, and some of it ties in with this representation, with this presentation you've given to us, sorry. One point about what does good look like. What does good look like? There's one fundamental point that has been missed throughout this presentation, and that's trust. What about trust in the council improving? Because at the moment in Chiswick, and I suspect elsewhere, there is very little trust that anything is going to change for the better, that any voices are going to be heard any more clearer, any voices are going to be taken on board if they don't fit into the agenda. And I think what Councillor Dunn was saying in response to Kuldeep was no. That's the word that you just didn't use.
Why didn't you just listen to what I said? I didn't say no.
Are we having interventions, Chair, or at the beginning or at the end? What's the form here?
Sorry, I was actually
writing. Would you like me to
repeat
repeat my answer to Councillor Tack?
Yes,
Would that be helpful?
No, well, I understood what you meant by it, which was no. You know, the third option.
No, that's not what I meant, Councillor Biddulph. Right, well, maybe I should repeat it.
Perhaps you would like to, yes.
Yes.
I've missed it.
I think I was quite clear that engagement with residents should cover as wide as our imaginations are.
No, that's not what you said. You didn't say that. You can't.
No, I didn't say that. I'm rephrasing. Do you understand the concept?
I do, but that's not what you offered us. You said you would repeat your answer. So could you repeat your answer?
Okay, I'll use exactly the same words. I didn't think that would be particularly helpful.
It wasn't.
The initial engagement should be very broad and involve all sorts of ideas from the community as to what they would like. I'm trying to remember exactly what words I used here. At some point, that has to be narrowed down to what is feasible, and then in the formal consultation, in order to follow those guidelines and things that you have printed out there, you have to offer people a choice between things that can actually be implemented.
And one of them is do nothing.
Okay, can we just stop it right there, please? Because we really, really do have a lot to get through, if you don't mind.
I would like to finish my second point.
Can we hurry up, please?
Yes, absolutely. So now I'm quoting residents. Another comment was, overall, I think so much trust has been lost in Chiswick with rigged consultations. See the latest TfL nonsense, re-CS9. Personal attacks. That's something that we've really got to home in on as councillors. There's too much personal attack, particularly on social media. And the council's deaf ear that these warm words will do little to reassure us that LBH is listening. I note that nobody's making any notes at this point. Another comment is, well, what do you expect if you keep ignoring the wishes of the great majority of your residents? Of course, they'll be apathetic and stop interacting. This is about going to events. It's what one person writes, what strikes me is that if councillors are doing their jobs well, they should already be engaged with their communities, their local communities and organisations, discussions, issues, possible solutions, acceptable compromises, etc. So it's really an issue of training for officers. We are engaged. Why aren't you? Is what residents are saying.
Okay, Councillor Biddulph, I'd like you to stop there now, please.
No, I just have one final point.
But can you make it really, I've already just given you some time.
But I'm still in my
I know, but we have a lot to get through yet.
Indeed, I know we have, very important.
We haven't even come up with the recommendations yet.
No, so the last comments I'll make is this appointment of consultants is a waste of money. 60 pages of verbiage. This is a resident speaking at what, 1,000 a page? Instead, this committee should tell the CEO to manage his team properly. It's appalling that many officers reported that they are unfamiliar with the borough's communities. I've made that point already. Officers should be located within the communities. We in Chiswick have got a town hall where officers could work from. They would soon learn
Councillor Biddulph, I'm going to stop you right there. I would just like to say that at the beginning of this meeting, I did ask that everybody be mindful of some of the language that was used, and I think you used the term loaded at one time, and I don't think that was particularly nice.
Questions were loaded.
No,
Chair.
but it was your
Questions-
interpretation and the way you used that.
No. You need to understand Chiswick, Chair. They were loaded questions in a consultation. It was absolutely clear.
But
It's
anyway,
been
I'd like to bring
analysed.
this to an end now, please.
The questions were loaded.
I'd like to bring that to an end.
Sorry,
Councillor
Chair.
Akinzada, if you've got
Hello.
a question, please ask, because that's enough now.
Chair,
We need
sorry.
enough. Thank you.
Chair.
Yes.
Hi, sorry. Is this
Sorry.
an appropriate juncture to extend the meeting? Because there's 5 minutes left of the allocated. Yeah, I mean, it's going to go over, but can you formally do that then? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Right. Councillor Akinzada, if you could ask your question quickly. Let's get through these recommendations, and then let's get on to the last topic so we can all go home tonight, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is not a question. I won't take that long. Luckily that Mr. Khan was here, he have responded it to that question. But I just want to mention it that we don't need to politicize everything. The job of the scrutiny committee is to give suggestions, come up with good suggestions so that we can feed up and help the council to be in a right direction. Now, it's been said, and he was not part of this discussion, Mr. Khan, and I just wanted to mention it that he made that video individually. It was nothing to do with the council. So if the Councillor Mashisho was that enthusiastic about it, he could have come up with his own video and include, yes, so that's good. And this is not the right forum to raise this question. So we need to be mindful that what we need to raise on what forum, and we need to be not politicize everything on every forum. So that was just my, luckily Mr. Khan was here, so he have responded himself.
Okay, can we leave it there, please? Okay, now we've done with all the questions and comments. I have a few comments, and then we're going to leave it there, please. Right.
Chair, could it just be noted that nobody responded to my points, apart from Catherine, that there weren't details? It doesn't have to be done. It can be done in writing afterwards, but it just needs to be noted that you've treated one councillor differently.
Okay. And also we're going to hopefully be done and over by 10:30. I'm going to extend the standing orders until 10:30. So maybe we need to wrap this up. Okay, just a couple of things.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yes, sorry.
I'm Councillor Adriana George. I'm not going to be able to stay more than half an hour because I have backup carers who they can't stay for very long.
That's fine. That's
Apologies for that.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay. What I would just like to say is that, hold on, I've written down some points for myself here. I have to say that I was involved during the pandemic with some various charities, and I know that I spoke to some of you. And I have to say that it was just one particular charity that I'm thinking of at the moment, which was a very small charity. It was just one individual lady setting it up. Now, she sent numerous emails to officers, to which really nobody responded. I intervened, I sent emails, then there was a visit. So I do think that maybe we need to, or you need to think about how you can be more accessible to smaller charities. And also in making the smaller charities or individuals or groups of people aware of the funding that they can access. I don't know how you do that. Again, that's something that I think you need to think about. Another recommendation is that we really do need to, we need to reach out to people that we don't normally engage with. And I'm just going to use the term BAME here, so please excuse me, just at the moment. And white people, we do need to look at the other white communities, the East European communities. We need to look at the Somali community. You could think about maybe going to places of worship. I know some the Polish people have the Polish schools. for worship or just for getting together. I think you need to look at different places where you can engage with them, because I have Polish neighbors and they are clueless. Not because, just because they don't feel that they are asked questions. So what else? I think we have that, again, that comes back to recognizing that our population is more diverse than we just always assume. Another thing is early engagement. And also the methodology of engagement, I think, is something you're all going to have to rethink. Times are changing. So we really do need that to be updated and evolved, I think. The other thing is, one last thing, and then that's it, is I think the residents of Hounslow need to feel that they are being listened to. Some people respond. We know surveys do go out. Absolutely understand that. And I know you all work as hard as you can, and you cannot please everybody all of the time. But I just think in some ways we need to make people feel that we are listening. And like you say, we can't give them what they want all the time, but then at least respond. So I think those are just some proposals. And yeah, thank you.
Chair, sorry, I know you said that was the last point, but one very little.
That's fine, Cormac.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight the point about digital inclusion, just to kind of really emphasize that point, because I know it came up in our workshops about that there are communities and wards that do face that are digitally excluded. So just kind of, what more can we do to reach them? And one example I'd just like to just get information on, if I can, is the funding that's available that communities can apply for. Is that only online, or are there other ways of applying for it as well? And if not, then can we maybe have other avenues to apply? Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I think that ties in with making people more aware of how they can access funding.
Yeah. Can I just quickly respond on the particular point on, firstly, digital inclusion? Yes, you're right in terms of it's more and more important all the time. And we have been able to fund, and again, I'm coming back to through the Thriving Communities Fund, we have been able to fund some resource to work particularly with voluntary sector organisations, again, to upskill them and actually promote digital inclusion through the cohorts of residents who come to those organisations. So we funded a person basically to go around voluntary sector organisations and doing that work. So it is something, and also some funding around reconditioning devices and being able to get them to people in need, and also some training around the best ways and most effective ways to manage data and that sort of thing, so bills don't escalate. What was the second point you raised again? The online, sorry. Yeah, so you don't have to apply online for the Thriving Communities Fund or your neighbourhood grant. You can telephone our officers, or you can manually complete a form.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much, Councillor Dunn, Ben and Elia. You're free to leave if you wish. And Cormac as well. You've got 15 minutes, perfect. Okay, last but not, sorry, what was that, Councillor Lukey? Right, last but not least, and I'm hoping we can wrap this up in an hour so that everybody can go home. We have the last topic, which is Cycleway 9. We have a chance this evening to provide suggestions on engagement and qualities prior to this being taken to Cabinet on July the 20th. I will be giving feedback to the Cabinet and in the form of a supplementary report, which will be, as I said, ahead of their meeting on the 20th. I'd just like to give a tiny little bit of background, and we all know what's going on. Cycleway 9 is a proposed high-quality cycle route that runs between Olympia and Brentford. The route corridor that C9 follows has a poor cycle casualty record, and based on the forecast increase in cycling, without the introduction of C9, collisions with cyclists are likely to increase. And in late 2020, a temporary version of Cycleway 9 was introduced in Chiswick as part of the pandemic response. I would now like to invite Councillor Hanif Khan and Victoria Lawson to introduce the report and the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I would first of all like to say I'm very impressed with your knowledge of C9. Thank you very much. And it's great that you are aware of what's been going on as well. And with myself, I would also like to say that you mentioned Victoria Lawson, who's the Executive Director for Environment, Culture, Customer Services, who's sitting on my left, who will be delivering a presentation. On my right, I've got Councillor Lambert with me here today, who you all know. And also I'm joined with with Officer Jefferson Newaka. We'll get this right, okay? And I'm nearly there with this, okay? Who is the Assistant Director of Transport for Parking, Environmental Strategy. And also I'm joined further around with two other gentlemen by the name of Andrew Hatch. He is from Transport for London as well. He's the Community Partnership Specialist. And Corring down, we've got John Futcher, also from Transport for London, and he is the principal sponsor for C9. So that's, and also if Councillor Dunn is willing to stay, I know she's probably extremely tired, she's also been very heavily involved with this project with me as well. So you, in terms of my very short introduction, you have already eloquently, Chair, said some important things, which I think it's ideal for us to recognise that what we are here today to ask for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is to seek input on the engagement. And I think we've had a very enjoyable conversation for the last topic we were talking about. So really what I wanted to say is that this whole concept of shaping the kind of pre-engagement process and for you to provide some suggestions and also on any kind of further inequalities impact on issues that need to be considered that we have not yet considered, that haven't already been decided or put into the report that we will be submitting to Cabinet. And obviously how we and our team with Transport for London continue to gather feedback from groups with protected characteristics and other pedestrians. So that's what we are asking for the Overview and Scrutiny panel here today, to help give us some suggestions on that, which will be ideal. And obviously, I want to thank you for the opportunity for us to be able to be here today, for you to help us with this really, really important next step that we are doing, because as you know that active travel that's outlined in the kind of transport strategy is really crucial to what we do in terms of transport as well. And if you remember back in 2019, we did make a decision to actually put in a permanent one, and it was approved by Cabinet, but because of the pandemic, as we know today, which we've all been through, a temporary one was put in under an experimental traffic order. And during the last 6 months of its implementation, we've learned and had lots of feedback and lots of comments, and we've also recognized that there were some concerns as well. So this is for us to go to the next level, and we are proposing to the Cabinet for recommendations to kind of cease the existing experimental traffic order and implement a new one. And that's why we're here today, which I outlined at the beginning of this input engagement. So I'll hold there, and what I would request Victoria to do is to deliver a very, very short presentation, because I'm conscious of the time. And with my team here of the experts, my request from you is to actually ask lots of questions, and we can answer them, but we will answer them in brief. So we're not intending to have long, drawn-out questions, because I'm conscious you want to end within the next hour, less than an hour. So I'll stop there, and happy to obviously take questions, but my experts are with me today. Over to you, Victoria. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Khan, and thanks to the committee. So just very briefly, this is illuminated in all the papers that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee have received. So you've received the full Cabinet paper and appendices on the current design of the temporary C9, the proposed design, the equality impact assessment, and some supplementary information to that equality impact assessment. So Cabinet agreed in September 2019 the permanent design, and at that point consultation, predominantly because active travel is an important objective in the Council's transport strategy. However, the pandemic led to work being paused on the permanent cycleway 9, and instead, following a range of statutory guidance from the government and guidance from TfL, we implemented a range of temporary measures, which included making the C9 cycleway temporary. That decision was taken in August 2020, and the construction of that was completed in December 2020. For those of you who've not seen it, this is broadly where the C9 temporary scheme runs. I want to draw out tonight some of the performance of the current temporary C9 scheme. So, for cycling, it's been, as you'd expect, positive. We are seeing increased numbers of children and families. We are seeing cycling safety improve. The maximum daily flow of cyclists has increased significantly, and cycles are now making up 20% of all traffic between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. on an average day. However, we have also recognised that the bus journey times have been impacted, and they are up by 1.3 minutes per kilometre, so they are a little bit slower than the average in 2019. That's in part due to increased traffic that we're seeing post-lockdown, and it will be interesting to understand traffic flows from next Monday on the 19th of July, when all lockdown restrictions are lifted, and obviously because we've made amendments to the bus lanes and put in new cycling traffic signals. We do know that there's a significant section between Chiswick Lane and Goldhawk Road that is a particular hotspot for bus delays, and there have been some emergency Thames water works that have also caused delays on performance. It's okay, Councillor. As part of any scheme, we will always get communications and feedback. Because it's been put in as a temporary C9, it's been put in under what's called an experimental traffic order. That means the consultation is undertaken when it's in situ, therefore getting feedback on the live environment and experience. And this slide outlines, as is in the report, the communications and engagement directly with and from TfL, and the communications directly with and from the Council. Inevitably, schemes such as this get feedback both for support and outlining concerns and issues. So we have received support for the scheme. That tends to be in the form of increased opportunities for cycling. We have received a number of correspondence from young people who've written to the Council in support. TfL have commissioned some independent market research as well to understand views of the community about those changes, and the data reveals support for making cycle routes safer, and a slight majority in resident support in the protected lanes on Chiswick High Road. Just in terms of concerns, and the paper does go into significant more detail about these, but residents, businesses and stakeholders have raised concerns around congestion, road safety, making deliveries, not having seats or shelters at some of the bus stops, a perception that the increase in parking and loading restrictions harms the local economy, a view that eastbound cyclists will still use the main carriageway rather than the cycle track, a perception air quality is being made worse, some views around how it disproportionately affects people who are disabled, elderly or pregnant, the view that C9 as a temporary scheme is divisive, and that the Council implemented C9 as a temporary scheme before carrying out the public consultation. So implementing a new experimental traffic order, that is the proposition and recommendation from officers going to Cabinet next week. And it's in response to those concerns raised by residents and businesses and other stakeholders about some of those schemes. So in order to make those changes, we want to discontinue the current trial and implement a new trial and therefore a new experimental traffic order. I won't go into the detail of this, but the report covers it. But what would it cover? We want to make sure that some waiting and loading restrictions are experimentally lifted on some sections of side roads. We want to look at the loading bay outside number 160 on Chiswick High Road, so it can operate as a taxi rank, introduce bus stop shelters on all the islands, reinstate 2 traffic lanes at the Chiswick Lane Junction to see if that will help ease and reduce congestion and improve journey times. There are some implications for doing that in terms of widening the carriageway, but also narrowing the footway and the loss of a tree, which would be replaced. It would also enable us to reinstate some of the bus lanes in particular parts of the current temporary scheme by implementing this new ETO. And it will give us opportunities as well for taxis to drop off and pick up passengers as well. By implementing a new usage, particularly in an environment that's post-pandemic or post-lockdown, and we'll also be able to test the sufficiency of parking, sufficiency of pick-up and drop-off, and potentially improve the balance of the curbside activity and network performance. So what we are proposing as part of the recommendations to Cabinet is that we run a 21-day pre-engagement exercise or process. And we've got some suggestions here, but as Councillor Khan's outlined, really keen to get the input of overview and scrutiny. We didn't want to give a long, exhaustive list. We actually wanted your views and your perspectives. The purpose of that pre-engagement is to engage with key stakeholders and residents about the performance and feedback of the scheme to date, inform them about next steps, and to pick up any new issues or new concerns that haven't yet been represented either in the report or in the Equalities Impact Assessment. And I'll leave this up, Chair, because this is the support that we're seeking from overview and scrutiny. We're happy to take any questions that the committee might have.
Sorry, what was that?
I need to inform you of something. There's a mistake on the presentation.
Okay, would you like to tell us where?
Yep. Madam Chairman, the mistake involves the name of a road. All these characters think they know Chiswick. So primarily, where is Homefield Road? Holmfield. What's the name of my ward? It's Homefield. You are denying around about £175,000 worth of council tax value by removing that road from your scheme.
Thank you, Councillor.
If you get a small thing that wrong...
Councillor McGregor, we'll give you a chance to speak in a moment, please.
No. The point is, we've just had a presentation that is manifestly incorrect.
Okay, but we'll allow you to speak in a while. Thank you. Okay, anyway, thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, Chair.
For that, thank you. Okay. I'd just like to say a couple of things. I love Chiswick. I frequently go there for brunch or a meal. Great shops, wonderfully wide pavements, leafy. And last week, Councillor Foote and myself went along with Jefferson and some people from the TfL to have a look at it with a different perspective, not just relaxing or having a jolly. And what I saw and Councillor Foote saw were that people were using the cycleways and the traffic was flowing well that moment. I'm not going to say that's necessarily always the case, but that was pre-Cycle 9 anyway. And I particularly remember saying to Councillor Foote, we saw one lady riding along on a bicycle with a little sidecar with 2 of her kids. The other thing I would like to say tonight is that everybody here is articulate enough to be mindful of the language that they use when speaking to each other. So please all bear that in mind. And finally, Councillor Hearn and Councillor McGregor are here this evening because committee members, councillors Bidoff and Mashisho, both represent Turnham Green. So in order to be seen to be fair, we have allowed you both to come along this evening. So would anybody like to start off with questions or anything? Yes, Councillor Gamel.
Chair, may I say that some of the reports regarding this agenda item were received late, today. But having read them briskly this afternoon, as soon as they came in, I thought there was quite a lot of issues that were presented in that report. But also, I mentioned earlier on that we all had communication with individuals and groups about the scheme that took place. So I had a lot of questions regarding this scheme in terms of consultation, etc. But in essence, to cut to the chase, what Victoria's presentation has done is totally nullified any of the issues that I had. One of the big issues that I did have was the consultation of local councillors, which I briskly saw it in there as well. So regarding consultation, regarding this, you've taken into account all the issues, as far as I can tell, which you gleaned from the previous ETO. So you're stopping that one, and you're going to do another trial ETO, taking into account all the issues that have come to your attention to date. And then with this 21-day trial period, if there's any further issues, I think you're going to be well placed to address them. So I'm really pleasantly surprised and welcome the presentation that was given.
Thank you. Would anybody like to say thank you or respond to that?
I can just start very quickly. The 21 days is an engagement for us once we cabinet approve it, and then, as you know, once we start the new experimental traffic order, again the consultation process starts again. So even at that moment, if we find that there are still some things that we need to improve on, there's that opportunity to do so as well. And obviously, thank you very much. Victoria, or anyone add anything to that? No? Okay. No, thank you.
Councillor Bidoff had her hand up first, and then Councillor Lukey.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I've got a significant point to make, and then I could have raised a point on every single slide of the presentation and every single page of the map, and I appreciate that we haven't got time for that, but I just need you to bear that in mind. And if I could just say as an initial point, I don't like being patronised about the language that I'm going to use. I hope that I don't, and the word loaded is a perfectly sensible word to use in a skewed consultation. But Chair, I don't think one...
Chair, could I just ask a quick question, please, if you allow me?
Yes.
Yeah. I just want to check before Councillor Bidoff says her statement, just to reiterate why we're here today, is to get some input on the engagement. So just wanted to say that point. Thank you.
Certainly. I just would like to say, in terms of engagement and consultation and experiencing Chiswick, one trip and going for brunch doesn't cut it, I'm afraid, because the implications that the CS9 has is on a much wider group of people than whether somebody's cycling it down it when you're there. You need to talk to all the traders, all the residents. You need to have a representative consultation with people. Popping in just to have a look isn't the way to do it. And I know that as well from previously when Mark Frost arrived on the 8th of March to meet Sam and me to go through the changes that were about to happen. He described certain roads so inaccurately, it was extraordinary. So please accept that this scheme is really well understood by councillors in Chiswick, and it is purely happenstance. And I hate to have to say this, that it is not a party political issue. It just happens to be that Chiswick is represented by 9 Conservative councillors. There isn't any option but to take the views of the councillors from one particular, who are from one party, but we're not making party political views. We are talking about the impact of this scheme. But what really worries me, and I'm sorry I'm going to have to agree with you, Councillor Lal, because I don't think that anything that Victoria has said has allayed any fears at all in Chiswick. It's motherhood and apple pie stuff. What I'm really concerned about is, and I'd love to know how many of you have actually read it, is there's a letter from a lawyer, Sharp Pritchard, pointing out some huge inadequacies in the way in which this has been conducted. And if you read between the lines, we've got our monitoring officer here. If you read between the lines, there are things that Hounslow has not done to enable this to happen legally. And I think this is getting us into very deep and hot water legally. And I'd like to have a view on that. The stats and the points that Victoria have raised are all disputed. So everything that she has asserted has been disputed. There are facts, so-called, about cycling numbers, which are comparing February. No, I'm sorry, I have to have a chance.
Just Councillor Biddulph finish and then you can respond.
I'm making an important point.
I've said Councillor Biddulph can continue.
Thank you. Well, he's trying to intervene again. All of these figures are disputed, whether you want to recognise it or not. If you do a comparison of cycling numbers in February, when it was raining largely and snowing, with April, when, if you recall, we had an extraordinary April this year with not a single April shower. We had all the April showers in May, and people cycle in good weather. So, of course, the figures in February are going to be lower than the figures in April. So you can't take those figures and call them facts. They're just not correct. So are the accident stats. They're disputed. We've got different figures for that. And the numbers of people cycling, it's just not visible in that way. And the way in which it should be done is a proper count on the same day that TfL did a first count in 2015, and then we replicated in 2018. There'd been a marginal increase. So you really need to replicate it on those 2 days in June. But I go back to this legal point, which is absolutely fundamental. I don't think that the council is prepared for what's to come. It's quite clear that this move is to scupper the judicial review. You're changing an ETO for another one in order to avoid that court case, because you know that you're going to lose it.
Chair.
And that's please stop.
Chair, I think we need to step in here. This is subject to legal proceedings, and I'd like us to take the advice of our Assistant Director for Governance before we proceed on this conversation.
Yeah. Okay, Rachel, would you please?
I would do, yes. So the correspondence received today, that has been responded to. On the technical points, we have the responses to those. But that is the case. I mean, there is a separate in tandem judicial process ongoing, and that is in respect of not this. This is the new order, which is the iteration, I suppose. But the current order that we're looking at now is separate to that. So the advice that I would give is we not really to discuss the ongoing judicial review, because we are going to be in the High Court on that. And there's also ADR kind of process that's.
So the ADR point was fundamental to this. And thank you very much for that comfort. I appreciate that. It's a very welcome intervention. Could we see the response? Because here we are as the Overviews and Scrutiny Committee without adequate information. And that's also bearing in mind the point that was raised earlier about the fact that we got the papers only on Friday evening, and then we got one paper this afternoon. So we really are not being served well as a committee. So if we could see that response, that would be helpful. Could I look then at the legal comments that you've made on the paper? This is purely on the paper, so it is about the scheme, the paper that's going to Cabinet. It's your legal comments, and in particular the bullet points. You mentioned the case of R.V. Brent. And you say that all fair consultations must satisfy. Consultation must be undertaken at a time when proposals are still at a formative stage. Well, this is a whole new scheme. These are major changes. They're bad changes on a bad scheme. They're yet more flaws. Where's the consultation? Because this cannot go to Cabinet in this form without any idea of what that consultation is going to be. And it says sufficient reasons must be given for any proposal to allow an intelligent consideration of in response to the proposal. What's that? Adequate time must be given for consideration and responses must be conscientiously taken into account in finalising any proposals. That hasn't happened. That needs to happen. I don't think that we can endorse this. In fact, I know we can't endorse this. This cannot go to Cabinet in the form that it's in. It's inadequately put together. This whole thing is one big experiment. There's an experiment going on which has failed, and TfL recognises it's failed at last, because that's why there are amendments that are coming in. All those amendments are flawed. They are flawed changes to a flawed scheme. We've all had a representation from outside of TART, David Lesniak, whose business is on the corner of Chiswick Lane. This is now in Homefields. He's just described something incredibly simple that is so important. It's too narrow a turn now for the lorries that go round that corner to make it. TfL doesn't have that detail. We do. He does. He sees it happening every day. It's that kind of information that is completely lacking from this report. There is no local information. It's just warm words, like the consultation programme. It's It's come from people who do not understand the area, and we cannot take it in this form. It's not fit to go to Cabinet.
I'd just like to make a point. We're not here today to endorse. We're simply to comment on equality and engagement.
Those were all on engagement. Those points were all on engagement.
Yeah, but we're not here to endorse. Victoria or Councillor Khan, who wishes to respond?
Yes, just to come in on some of those points. So obviously our monitoring officer has outlined that we are still subject to a judicial review, so we are not going to cover any comments about that. What I would also say is the technical design for the new experimental traffic order, and therefore the new trial, has been designed by TfL with support from council officers. I think it's deeply unfair to refute their reputation and their ability to do that. Part of the recommendation going to Cabinet is about understanding and having taken into account the volumes of feedback from residents and businesses. Reshaping and putting in place a new trial, I think, demonstrates that this council is listening. We want to put in positive active travel. This is a scheme that has been in place or proposed to be in place from 2019 as a permanent scheme. I think what we're suggesting here tonight and looking for input from Overview and Scrutiny is, what does the 21-day pre-engagement exercise look like, noting as well that for all experimental traffic orders, there will be a period of 6 months consultation. We have done it through the interim review process for our street space scheme, and we are proposing to do it through this scheme, as we have done so far to date. Hence, why we have a report that outlines a list of concerns that we are responding to and recommending to our Cabinet, quite appropriately as officers, that there should be a new trial. And I would ask Overview and Scrutiny if they could please comment on any further feedback that they'd like to provide to that pre-engagement process. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, I did say that my points were in two parts, so I hope I can raise the second parts of those, because it directly impacts on what Victoria has just said. And if we're talking about engagement, my first comment is it cannot be how it has been up till now. It simply can't. The facts that you've got, or factoids, they're not even those on page 6 of my printout. It's printed to, anyway, the communications and feedback section. For example, you've got invitation for community conversations were sent to 655 stakeholders. That's 655 people out of about 40,000 residents and 31,000 incoming businesses in normal times. It's tiny. Nevertheless, of those 655, only 48 were interviewed. And you've got this here in your list. Of the 48, 23 approved in some way of the scheme, and that is deemed at 47% to be a majority. It's not. 23 people cannot decide what's best for Chiswick. We don't even know if they were residents of Chiswick.
Councillor Biddulph, sorry to interrupt, but we have half an hour to go, so yes, I would just like you to cut to the chase.
I will.
And let's just get on with this.
I will. So it cannot. So engagement and consultation cannot be as it's been done up till now, because it's not correct. 23 people do not hold the deciding decisions on what happens in Chiswick. Other facts, somebody else has said it, Gerald has said it, there are so many inaccuracies in this that trust is lost. Again, we talked about trust in community engagement before. It's gone with this presentation. You've mentioned, or TfL, whoever it is who's come up with a 4,319 signature petition on all COVID-related schemes. There wasn't one. The only petition that there was on TG, Turnham Green Terrace, and Fisher's Lane. And it's currently standing not at 4,319, but 10,253. So I cannot take it seriously. You say you had 269 emails. Hanif Khan has said in a meeting himself he had 3,000. What's happened to those? 177 of them specifically objected to C9T. It's nonsense. I'm still waiting. If you talk about consultation.
I would ask Councillor Biddulph, you're making accusations and accusing officers of putting information in that's not correct.
It isn't correct.
I would strongly advise
it isn't correct
about the language that you are using. They are very serious allegations.
I'm not going to.
Okay, can we just stop it right there, please, Councillor Biddulph? I've asked you a couple of times this evening to be mindful of the language that you use, your tone also. I'm sorry, I don't want any interference from you, Councillor Moshisho. We need to wrap up. Councillor Bidoff is not the only person that wants to speak tonight. So please be respectful in how you, or as Victoria Lawson says, about language that you're using.
I would
Enough.
like Rachel
if you're going to just
go
carry on in the
through-
same vein, then I'm going to ask
I'm
you to
not.
refrain from speaking.
I'm not. Please give me a chance. You're
Then
being
please
very-
hurry up.
I would like Rachel
Chair,
as
if I
monitoring
may,
officer.
could I please respond to something that Councillor Bidoff has raised?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, you've invited us here today from TfL to speak about this, and I was the one who organised the community conversations piece of engagement that we did, and I just feel that it's crucial to recognise the role that that piece of work was intended to play in this, and what it was not intended to play the role of was a referendum or a formal consultation. What it was one small piece of an ongoing, continuous piece of engagement on the temporary scheme. The 655 people that were invited were those that proactively engaged with us in some form or other, and those were the people that we had email addresses for. The 48 people that were successful in registering to have a community conversation with us, that number was purely dictated by the resources we had available to us. This is a highly resource intensive piece of work, 48 15-minute conversations, one of which Councillor Mashiso registered for and then didn't turn up for in the end. So it's difficult to reach out to people in a pandemic in any other way than virtual. But we are here to listen to Councillor Bidoff's suggestions on how we can be better on that front going forward. The alternative to us not going ahead with the community conversations was not talk to local people at all, which in our opinion was not an option. There was no self-selection going on with the community conversations. I don't know where the figure of 23 has come from, because like I said, that wasn't a consultation. We didn't analyze the responses in a consultation fashion. Therefore, we didn't count the responses. So I'm not quite sure where you've got that figure from, but it's not correct.
I got them from...
Thank you. Thank you. Can we end there? Right. Would anybody else like to say anything this evening? Right. That's what I'm saying. So Councillor Lukey, please, and then Councillor Mashiso. Because we don't have the time, Councillor Mashiso.
I was making a point about what should happen next, and that is, since I've been accused of behaving inappropriately, I would like the monitoring officer to go through the recording and find out where I used inappropriate language.
You've obviously upset a lot of officers this evening, which isn't a great start to the new municipal year. So can we cut it right there, please? Councillor Lukey.
Shall I give you my Chiswick credentials as well? Because I don't just go there for brunch. I've got three Lukey households in Homefields Ward, not Homefield Ward, and others across the border in off Goldhawk Road, and including two of the family that are traders within Turnham Ward and within Homefields Ward. I know the area very well. In fact, if we go back to the 90s, when we were proposing the CPZs in Chiswick, and I was vice chair of transport there, I even had a Christmas carol written about me and a demonstration led by my brother-in-law along Chiswick High Road. So yeah, I've got some skin in this game as well. And what I have found since I've driven down Chiswick High Road, since the cycle lanes have been put in, I have found that if I don't want to get caught up in traffic, I'll use the A4, or I use a different route, or I use a bus, and that's or I will walk, because it's not that far really to walk from Isleworth to Chiswick. And that's where I get my hair cut from time to time, and that's where I shop from time to time. So the suggestion that only Conservative councillors in Conservative councillors have exclusive right to comment on Chiswick matters is nonsense, and it's embarrassing, and it's patronising to the rest of us who try to live in this great big borough of the London Borough of Hounslow, which includes Chiswick. Okay, you're not. I know some of you are separatists, but this is not about separatism. What I have found, though, when I do drive down Chiswick High Road, is that stupid junction as it stands at the moment at Chiswick Lane, trying to turn left. And I always worry about killing somebody, not seeing them as I'm trying to turn left onto Chiswick Lane to get to the Hogarth, and people are zooming up, or not necessarily zooming up, but riding up on the cycle lane there, particularly during the dark. That's a preamble to this. Look, we're here to talk about consultation as well. And what I would like to see in this consultation, I would like to see prominent signs on lampposts, not the usual nonsense that we in London Borough of Hounslow. This goes back to consultation as well, if you like, the planning consultation stuff that we don't like to advertise widely. But I'd like to see some proper signs up there, and not just the London Borough of Hounslow written signs that, which I can't even read from here on the screen there. But I want to see the maps there. I want to see appropriate drawings on the. I say I want to. It's up to you as cabinet members if you want to take this up. But you've got a consultation person here, you've got a highways person here, you've got an implementation person here, you've got some cyclists here as well. Don't know why you do that, but I'd like to see that advertised there. I'd like to see that prominent weekly in all the giveaway papers, weekly in all the social media, not just a one-off, but at various points, and not just on the high road, Turnham Green Terrace, side roads, the library, Dukes Avenue, even, I tell you what, even Goldhawk Road, we own half of Goldhawk Road, one side of it, but see what we can do with the people from the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, the boundary people. There's a lot more that we can do to make people aware of this consultation for the new traffic order. You've got, it's not about 40,000 people. It's not the whole of Chiswick that wants to know about or needs to decide about or comment on this scheme. But yeah, the more the merrier. But we've got media that we can put out, and then we've got letters that we can write to everybody. We've got the business rate, database. Yeah, put a letter out, put a good brochure out on that. Really, it's not, part of the fear that comes from some corners and some quarters here is that they think that the council is going to the council has got something up its sleeve. But let's just put it out there. Let's spend some money on that. I know it's tight. I know TfL especially is tight. Those stupid arrangements made by the Department of Transport that are throttling transport for London. But this is an important issue, and I want to see this happening here for this piece of work on Cycleway 9 up to Brentford or along the High Road or wherever it is now. I want to see it right, because it's coming down my way soon, and I want to see that right as well. And so if you get it wrong now, this is I'm being a critical friend here with Overview and Scrutiny. To be honest, I don't know why I'm on this committee, but if we can do something now to show willing and to show how honest we are as a London Borough of Hounslow, and I see you're right in there, Victoria. Good on you. I hope you can decipher your handwriting when you get back later. But let's get some, let's get some proper. Let's get some proper consultation out, not mealy mouth, not meagre, as well. And can I just and whilst I'm speaking, can I just stick up for all councillors on committees wherever they are? Can I just leave it to the? Well, may I suggest to officers to leave it to the chair to discipline and to regulate councillors' comments rather than officers, with respect to officers.
Hear, hear.
Thank you for that, Tony Lukey. We're now going to go to Councillor Mishisho and then Councillor McGregor, who's been waiting here very patiently this evening. I would like to say that I hope you are both going to give some input really into engagement and equalities and your views on it, rather than background and what has happened. And, let's just keep to what we're supposed to be talking about now, please.
Chair, I think the reason why this report has come to us is because it's going to be rubber stamped, so that when it goes to cabinet, they then say, well, overview and scrutiny has looked at it, so therefore it's fine. The reason why I say that is because I've been here for 3 years on his overview and scrutiny, and the usual way of things is something's brought to us, we have very limited time to talk about it, as we do now, and then that is then seen as us going through and approving it for cabinet to then go and approve. So for me, the first thing to remember is this report has not come to us for us to recommend to cabinet. If it is, then I'm not recommending it. And the reason why I wouldn't recommend it to go to cabinet is because it has so many shortcomings. The first thing is, at the very initial beginning, Councillor Hanif Khan said that...
Chair.
The very first beginning, Councillor Hanif Khan.
The
very first beginning, Councillor Hanif Khan, if you stop interrupting me...
Can we not have any raised voices, please?
Stop interrupting me.
Okay, but can we keep our tone, please?
The very first point that Councillor Hanif Khan raised, which was to say that cycling, the reason why he wanted to move cycling in Chiswick is because of this poor cycle casualty record. That isn't the point of CS9, the temporary scheme. The way you put CS9 temporary scheme to us, to the councillors and to the residents, was that you wanted to encourage active travel. So which is it? Is it to stop accidents happening, or is it to encourage active travel? Now, if it's to discourage accidents happening, Mr. Khan, then the report is a bit miscued, because it says in your report that that very word again, black and mixed ethnic minority groups, are the most likely to get hit in a collision on a bike. Now, I'm a cyclist myself. I commute to work. I cycle for pleasure. I also drive my car. But the area of concentration where the black and ethnic minority groups are is not on Chiswick High Road. So if that is your argument, then this does not make sense at all. Now,
Councillor Mashisha, I'd just like to interrupt you. You're not talking about engagement. I said very specifically just before you spoke that that's what I wanted to listen to now. So could we just get to that, please? Otherwise, we are not going to get through this tonight.
I will move on to engagement, Chair. I'll move on to engagement because we have the Hounslow engagement review team right here. Now, I wonder what they will say about the level of engagement that we have had over CS9, the experiment. How many people have we actually engaged? How have we passed on the power? Let's look at our 5 points on your reviews. Have we, for example, listened to residents on a very micro level? Do we know their views? Have we, if you look at the 5 points are we taking stock? Have we reflected? Have we co-produced with the local community? And then have we then passed on the power? I think the answer to that is no, we haven't. We haven't done any of that. So, in fact, this report should be a guidance as to how CS9 should be implemented. And by the way, I am pro-cycling. I cycle. I want people to cycle. I want active travel. But active travel improved because of the pandemic, because people needed to go out and have a walk in the morning, walk to work, walk to the park, okay? It wasn't because you put CS9 there, okay? CS9 is secondary. And yes, I've used it, but you know what? Sometimes I prefer to go on the other side of the road where the CS9 is in there because it's less dangerous. There are less incidents or situations where you could get hit by someone turning right. Now, there are 2 areas in terms of engagement that I want the group that is implementing this, Victoria and Hanif, to consider. The first is the crossover from north to south at Heathrow Terrace. That is one of the most dangerous conflict there that you've got for cyclists getting across from the eastbound route going over to the dual westbound carriage. That needs to be looked at if you are going to go through with this. The second thing is to take into account is the turning from Turnham Green Terrace if you're turning right to Chiswick High Road. Now, that area, again, you needed to have consulted residents, spoken to residents on Devonshire Road and all those people who use that section, Linden Gardens and so on, because it's that section there that has not even been covered in this lengthy report. That's where you turn right and you end up finding yourself turning right onto the cycle lane itself, unless you're skillful enough and knowledgeable enough with the local area to actually turn your wheel a bit further and then to find your proper lane. That is an area of contention. So, but that's not been included in here. So when you talk about engagement, the people that you should be engaging with are the very people you ignore, withholding emails. I've seen countless of times that you've been written to, Councillor Hanif Khan, Victoria, where the reply back has been a holding email. That's not consultation.
Chair, again,
that is
through
not.
you.
That is not engaging your residents. That is
Chair,
not speaking to your residents.
Councillor, thank you for those suggestions. Can we just leave it there for now that you've just made?
Can I make one last point?
If it's a suggestion, yes. If it's a comment or just a response,
those
then
last
no.
three were suggestions, weren't
Yeah, I know. That's what I said. Thank you for those. If you heard me say that. So can we just leave it there?
No. I've got
You've
my
got one more suggestion?
I've got my suggestion.
Okay.
I'm continuing my suggestion. Okay.
Future plans, please, if you have.
So the future plan is a proper consultation. The future plan is engaging with residents. The future plan is not putting through something that TfL are pressurizing you to put through, but putting something
Chair,
where you can actually speak
Okay,
with residents.
again, you use the word pressurizing, which implies something negative.
What does
Please.
it imply to use?
Well, it implies as if it's something that shouldn't be done. When you say pressurizing, it doesn't sound as if it's, a choice. It sounds as if they are being pressured. No, and I said I want language to be considered. So please consider you could use another word.
Okay. There have been...
Find something else. You're articulate.
Are they? Okay, fine. CFL have influenced.
Collaborated would be a lovely word.
Influenced Hounslow to implement this current CS9 scheme.
Have you got any more suggestions? Have you got any more suggestions?
You've interrupted my flow, so how am I supposed to...
That's my right. I am the chair.
Is my right to respond to you as well?
Excuse me.
Is my right to respond to you as well?
Excuse me, Councillor Machito, you do need to listen to the chair because she has conducted the meeting.
Thank
Please,
you.
Well,
just be respectful.
I'm speaking for our residents in Chiswick who have not been listened to. She asked about engagement, and I'm telling you, you're not engaging.
And we do have to conduct ourselves with respect and in accordance with the code.
I understand.
Please.
But you asked me about engagement, and I've now said to you that
Yes, but you are implying, and I don't like the tone, and I don't like being called she, so please keep that in mind for future reference.
I will.
Either call me by my name or the chair.
I will, Chair.
Thank you.
So the consultation that I was talking about, we're not being consulted upon. So my proposal would be a full consultation, and we shouldn't be taking this paper to Cabinet.
Thank you. Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, this evening's been very interesting because we've had active debate on two elements, and this debate is deteriorating rapidly. I want to talk about engagement. I believe that the only engagement worth having in this particular case is a full-scale consultation. Nothing less, nothing more. This arbitrary attempt to create engagement at a lesser level by a series of nostrums is not at all appropriate. We've heard from several councillors who think that the Chiswick councillors should not be part of this consultation by the inferences that they've drawn. We are entitled to be engaged too. The Chiswick Area Forum has very little power compared to the Chiswick Area Committee as it was in July 2012, when we looked after transport, monitoring, planning, basic care in our part of the world and did it jolly well. Other area committees did not do so well. Engagement through committee, engagement through councillors is a key thing.
Chair.
Now,
let's let Councillor McGregor finish, please.
No, I'm willing to sit.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to understand, you're talking about history. We're on about future plans. What's next? I'll be really interested to learn about that. That'd be really great. Thank you.
I have a plan for the future, of course, and that will be represented in our manifesto, a winning manifesto in May 2022. And I heard the Greek chorus. Very nice. Thank you so much. So let me get back to engagement, because this is engagement. I have never said no to talking to Ms. Lawson or to Hanif Khan or to Mr. Lambert. And I welcome Mr. Nokioma, and I certainly welcome Catherine Dunn, because these are people who think about what they're trying to achieve. That's engagement. And you need political engagement to make this work. But the problem is, the real problem here is our scrutiny process is manifestly underpowered. We don't have enough staff to support our team. We don't have enough research capacity. If we had research capacity, we could test some of the stuff that TfL are giving us, and all being well, we could actually reflect on that and say, yeah, this works. We would have a greater item of trust, because there is a further dimension being developed within Hounslow to do that. Now, this takes time. And everyone says, no, we haven't got time because we want to get on, get on, get on. Okay, now I'm as radical as anybody else here, but I'm radical in a different direction. I'm prepared to spend money where money should be spent, and consultation is right. Now, with equalities, how do you deal with equalities? Are you setting out to trash Chiswick High Road? That's what many people think. That's what many, many people think. Or are you trying...
Chair, again, the word trash, please.
Okay, Councillor McGregor, please change the word.
You'll give me a ruling.
Improve is a good word.
Don't use the word trash, please.
Madam Chairman, as a councillor who obeys the chair at all times, I will accept what you say, but under protest. And I will talk to our legal representative later about this particular matter. If you wish to push stuff into my mouth, that's fine. But that means I'm not speaking the truth.
Just another word for trash.
All right. The pigsty of Chiswick High Road. That's been created.
Again, Chair, sorry.
Chair, there should be a walk-free zone.
Okay, I will stop there, but you understand what I'm getting at. Thank you.
I think we need some rules, Chair, about what we can and
can't
say, because...
Well, the one thing that I've said very, very clearly a couple of times, not just today, but I think June the 8th, is that I would like people to be, everybody to be polite and not accuse, and just to think about the words that they use. As I say, everybody here has a wide enough vocabulary to think of the words that they use. And if you want to say something negative like trash or pigsty, there are still other words that you could use. That's all I'm going to say on that for the moment.
If it waters down our points, I think that...
And I will just say one thing.
Let Councillor McGregor continue, please.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I will respect what you say, but I was repeating what people were telling me in Chiswick.
Okay, that's fine.
That's what I was doing. So you've heard the word. Let's move on. Let's move on. Now, when we engage fellow councillors, when we engage TfL, I want to do so on the basis of equality of capacity and the knowledge that people will actually understand and listen to what we have to say. When we come to equalities, it's difficult to talk about equalities when we hear Councillor Lukey talk about the fact that they think that people in Chiswick patronise. We don't. We just get on with life. Well, okay. Well, you can come back to me in a moment. Come on, tell me what you did say. Okay. So when it comes to equalities, which is the second part of this approach, how are we going to get to the different groups in our borough, if you prefer, or in Chiswick, or in the cycling community, which I'm a member of? How do we actually get across and get the equalities we want? Well, we're not going to achieve that because equality is a very complex issue. Are you going to try and select people by economic capacity? Are you going to try and select people by racial capacity? Are you going to select a minority ethnic person like me because I'm Irish? Great. Good news. Oh, Foot is there. Good man. Now, when we talk about these things, what I'm putting to everybody here is in terms of equalities, how do we actually get there? What do we mean by this talk about getting to look at equalities and engagement? How do we actually get there? And it's incredibly difficult. Now, one of the things that we could talk about equalities is the nature of responses to things that happen. And we saw that over the weekend with the England team and the dreadful responses that we saw on social media. We don't want any of that. It's unnecessary and it's stupid and it goes nowhere. Now, for me, if we talk about equalities, are we talking about talking to school children? Are we talking to students? Are we talking to young professionals? Are we doing a socioeconomic issue? Are we talking to people in rest homes and care homes who might actually benefit from cycling? How do we get this equalities issue out in the open? Now, I've got no answer to that. And therefore, I'm wondering why this is here. We're concentrating on inequalities, but no one's coming up with solutions. I hope eventually that politically it'll cure itself over time. But for us, in looking at it from the overview and scrutiny committee point of view, this is an open-ended book. It's very difficult to put a structure. It's very difficult to put parameters on what we call equality. It's very complex. So when we talk about this report, and I said earlier, this report has problems with it because quite simply, if you misspell the name of a major road that's the name of my ward, then that tells me that no one's done a great deal of thinking about the report you've been given. And that's just a small indicator, but small indicators build to big, big issues. And what I want to do with everybody here is to get people to understand we want maximum consultation. We want maximum equality input. We want demographic. We want all the things. We want different peer groups. We want different social groups to be looked at. But that won't be done in 21 days.
Chair.
That will require a full-scale consultation process prior to not an experimental order, but a full traffic order. And if you get that, fine. Yeah, I'm now happy to sit down. I've said enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. Councillor Khan or Jefferson?
I'll just start, but I'm not going to say anything because I've got so much to say. But there were some very specific questions in there. So I'll request first Jefferson, then Andrew, or either way, I don't mind.
I'll just quickly clarify
yeah, sure.
a couple of things. Then Andrew can respond to the consultation questions.
Sorry, just before that happens, are you extending what's happening?
Yes, actually, I was just sorry.
Okay,
yes, we're going to extend until 11 o'clock, and that will be it. So
I'll be extremely brief, Chair.
Thank you.
Anybody moving that? It's not your prerogative.
Yeah, I will move to
And who's seconding
extend.
it? And is there going to be a vote?
Councillor Biddulph will second it. Thank you. I didn't do a vote. No, I didn't. Okay. We're just going to stay till 11. End of.
I'll just make two very quick points. The concept of an experimental traffic order is quite different from a traffic regulation order, i.e. a permanent order. An experimental traffic order is supposed to be, as the name says, experimental. That is, a local highway authority has a right to embark on an experimental traffic order on its highway. That is covered by law under Section 9 of the Road Traffic Act 1984. So that is very important, and people need to understand the difference between that experimental traffic order and a permanent traffic order. An experimental traffic order doesn't require consultation prior to implementation. You implement and then you consult. That's exactly what it's meant to do. And that is quite different from what we're applying. What we're doing now, whilst it's an experimental traffic order, what we're proposing, we're actually going over and beyond by doing this 21-day engagement exercise. It's not a referendum on the scheme. It's not a question of whether you want the scheme or not. It's a question about how do we improve? Are there things we have missed out in planning for the scheme that you can help us improve the scheme? And again, it's a trial. The whole purpose of a trial is that it's not predetermined. We go through a period of time, we get engagement, we get feedback, and we see where we can apply some of those lessons learned. It's not predetermined, and that's something that people need to understand. The whole idea of an experimental traffic order is to support an experiment. So I think it might be useful for people to understand that before we proceed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that clarification, actually. I hope that makes it a little bit clearer for everybody.
Point of order,
There's one
Chair.
clarification that's needed, though, Chair, which is when is this work due to start? Are you saying in 21 days that the bulldozers come in? We do need to know that date, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Khan?
Yeah, as soon as Cabinet goes to Cabinet and they approve it.
Which will be after the
So
20th.
it is, as Jefferson is going to be consultation after the event. You're doing it on the 21st. You're waking up on the 21st and the first bollards are taken down or bus stop is installed or whatever it is, and then you're going to run a consultation.
No, Councillor Bidoff, just to clarify, so Cabinet will, if they agree the recommendations, will take that decision on the 20th. There's a period of, I think, 5 days for call-in, waits. So on the front of the report, it says the decision, and the decision that would be implemented from the 29th of July is the 21 days of pre-engagement. The fourth recommendation then outlines that the delegation about considering that engagement and the new concerns raised, the equality impact assessment that will be updated, a screening environmental impact assessment opinion, and all of that will be taken into consideration before I, as the senior officer in consultation with Councillor Khan, would then put the experimental traffic order in place. So there will be a period of time. If it's helpful, we can outline that more clearly in the report. Yeah, and
I think that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Councillor
Yeah.
Chair.
Is that
Thank you,
acceptable, Councillor Bidoff?
Yes, it is, and it just slightly differs from what Jefferson was saying. That's what I was so confused
So,
about.
Yeah,
Okay.
so this is about this next piece is about the process to get to the experimental traffic order. Once the experimental traffic order is in place, it will then be subject to full consultation.
If I may clarify, what I said is exactly what Victoria described. So what we're doing normally, usually on an experimental traffic order, you can impose it without prior consultation or engagement. We are going over and beyond that by having a 21-day consultation or engagement, I must stress, prior to implementation. That is over and beyond what is required by law. The law authorizes the local authority to impose an experimental traffic order prior to engagement. We are going over and beyond. We are engaging prior to implementation.
This is obviously to scupper the judicial review, which I know we can't discuss. Thanks for the clarification, because it isn't clear
Chair,
from the paper.
Thank you. Thank
Chair,
you.
Chair, Andrew was going to also
Say
respond.
something? Okay, Andrew, would you like to speak, please?
Yep, thank you. I'll make it as brief as possible because I probably need to get the last tube home. I just wanted to thank Councillor McGregor actually for the spirit of collaboration, which in which I believe he intended his speech before, because as Jefferson explained, we will be running, I think you called for a full consultation. That's exactly what we want. We want to run a full consultation for at least 6 months. We will be asking respondents for their experiences of the scheme. We'll be providing them with an opportunity, which will provide us with the opportunity for changes to be suggested. And I think we've got a good demonstrable track record of making agile changes to the C9 scheme already. There's some changes that we've made to the scheme in direct response to feedback we've received on the initial experimental traffic order. We'll be asking respondents whether they think the scheme should be retained or removed at the end of the experiment. And the real beauty of running a consultation alongside an experimental traffic order, as opposed to the more traditional way of consulting and then implementing, is that it really gives residents a greater influence on the final product, because you can make changes mid-experiment that you can't on a permanent scheme. You know, you could make changes mid-experiment, you could retain after the experiment, retain with changes, or choose to not retain at all. And to be crystal clear, we will be intending to publish a list of all the changes that we'll be making, including a map, a description of the purpose of the consultation. This is all on our new engagement and consultation platform, Have Your Say, which recently launched, and setting out what success looks like to TfL, a set of criteria by which we'll measure the success of the scheme or otherwise. And I would just want to emphasize that this approach to consultation has been ratified by the Consultation Institute and awarded its Best Practice Award And the Consultation Institute is a completely independent body to Transport for London, they're a not-for-profit organisation that provides expertise on consultation best practice across the UK. And they've awarded this approach to consultation best practice. But having said that, Councillor McGregor also raised really pertinent points about equalities and how we reach those hard-to-reach people. And I would really love to have a workshop with you and your fellow councillors, and so that we can get together and think about how we can maybe achieve that, because I think that will be key for us to work with you directly and all the other councillors in the area as well on this. Absolutely.
In answer to that, you should be aware that the Conservative group has spent the last three months discussing a report produced by the Conservative Party on racial and ethnic discrimination and loss of active values in communities that are hard to reach. So we've got a lot of expertise in our group about that, and I'd be more than happy to share it with you.
I'd just like to say thank you, Andrew.
Chair, can I just raise a point about what Andrew said, which is that there's the Market Research Society as well as the Consultation Institute, and they already have guidelines on how to reach hard-to-reach individuals and how to hold a consultation that is truly representative. So I'm surprised that you're not mentioning the Market Research Society.
Councillor Mashisha.
Thank you. Just a quick point. Thank you so much, Jefferson, for the clarification about consultation, about the experiments orders. Now, just out of interest of the members here, after the 6 months has elapsed, are we going to have another consultation, another experiment on top of the experiment? When does the experiment cease being an experiment, or are we going to have a continuous experiment on Chiswick High Road?
Thank you, Councillor Muchiso. An experimental order is designed to last for 18 months. Now, during those 18 months, at any point during a close, minimum though, that because you have to undertake a statutory consultation period of 6 months, you can't do it before the 6-month period elapses. So it has to be post the 6 months period, if you like. So maximum it has to be in places for 18 months. Minimum, if you like, in effect, is 6 months.
The current CS9, sorry, Chair, just very briefly. The current one is ending, as you say, very soon. So does that mean we start 18 months from the new experimental traffic order? Do you see what I mean? Are we starting a whole new one? So a whole new 18 months, or are we counting the previous?
No, yes, that's why it's a new ETO.
It's a completely new experimental order. So an experimental order is not extensible. And also the new order, the new ETO and the design associated with it are sufficiently different that we need a new order to be able to implement those changes and monitor it sufficiently.
Just a quick question for
yes.
a traffic officer. The presentation that I was shown earlier in the week, there's a new experimental traffic order for part of the road, but the rest of there's also the continuation of the original traffic order for another part of it. Have I misunderstood this?
John, do you want to answer that?
Yeah. So the plans as proposed to Cabinet are for changes along the whole of Chiswick High Road, but there's different levels of intervention. So what Victoria set out earlier is there's a greater level of intervention excuse me, around the Chiswick Lane to Goldhawk Road section of Chiswick High Road, where bus lanes are being reintroduced and additional traffic lanes running into Chiswick High Road. But the proposal that's going to Cabinet is for one singular experimental traffic order for the whole of Chiswick High Road and one trial for that period.
Thank you. My misunderstanding.
Thank you. Councillor Biddulph.
It's a point of order, really, or whatever they're called. I thought we were here for 2 points, as outlined on the front page of this paper. One was to consider the presentation and next steps, and one was engagement. You've focused very heavily on stopping the conversation about the proposals and wanting to talk about engagement. So I just want to set that record straight. I was here doing what I thought I should be doing.
Actually, you're mistaken. Very happy to have any proposals from you, Councillor Biddulph. Yes, of course.
Thank you. This is the biggest thing to have hit Chiswick, in my judgment, apart from probably the pandemic itself, the biggest thing for many years. Therefore, it has raised a lot of concerns, and that's why all the councillors engaged in this, and this is probably not a good forum and at this time of the night to be going into the detail. I'll try and be as concise as possible. I want to cover 3 areas which I would like to see in the report going to the Cabinet, and I would appreciate comments, particularly from the officers, TfL officers, and our own people. 3 areas are in air quality, modal shift, and safety. On air quality, those of you who've read the report closely will see there's only 1 air monitoring station. And I'll not be rude, but let's just say there is not sufficient information from that to be able to tell whether this scheme is having an impact on air pollution. And if we go back to the original air quality, the pollution consultants that TfL employed on the original scheme, their conclusion was that the original Cycleway 9 scheme would have a negligible impact overall on air pollution. And I just find it dangerous that this is being taken to Cabinet with the implication that this scheme improves air quality, even if the evidence is still very early. With 1 monitoring station, we're not going to know that much. This is a long road, or in my judgment, it's a long road, and we've got 1 air quality monitoring station. The point that the original consultants made was that a scheme like this moves the traffic around. As Councillor Lukey has said, people will try and avoid the congestion, and the pollution moves around from one area to another. So the report that goes to Council needs to clearly state the assumptions behind what is being said about air pollution. And the detail needs to be drilled down into, and that's why we have scrutiny officers who could do that kind of work for us. Modal shift. At the heart of this is the idea that if you make cycling easier, you will bring forward people who currently are making journeys in motor vehicles, perhaps buses, but probably cars, that you will reduce the number of car journeys because people will be travelling by bike, or perhaps by roller skate or scooter or whatever, but that you will reduce the usage of motor vehicles. That is not demonstrated in this report. If I've missed that, I'm sorry, but it's not demonstrated in this report. The increase in cycle journeys in relative terms is large. In absolute terms, it's not large. And we are also at a very strange state. I mean, the figures that we have are from the time of the lockdown. None of us knows what is going to happen now, whether people who are currently cycling will return to travelling by car, travelling by public transport, when the weather turns, etc., etc. We just do not have enough data. So I think the strength of argument from TfL needs to be tempered. And if it's in our report, and I look to our officers here and to Councillor Khan, TfL have in my opinion, have over-egged the cake. And let's come to safety. I am utterly confused now about safety. I did an awful lot of work on this with the original scheme because cycle lobby people were saying things. What's strange to me is that if this is such a dangerous road, why that didn't figure more seriously in the original campaign for the original cycleway. It just really didn't come there as an issue. When we looked at the data, we went back 12 years, and I'm trying to think where that goes back to. In the first 6 years of that 12 years, there were a number of serious incidents. Because of that, TfL and Hounslow Council's officers, the wonderful Mark Frost, engaged in changes to that road to make it safer. So in the second 6 years, the road was a lot safer. But where we're currently sitting is where TfL are telling us that there has been a big reduction in serious incidents, and they're saying that comes from the police. What we're finding out there is people who've also gone to the Met Police and have come up with completely different statistics. So sorry, I am being a bit long-winded. The report that goes to Cabinet must have a clear statement from the Metropolitan Police about safety during the period since cycle safety, since this scheme has gone live. And, you know, I want to see what the true position is. That I'm sure that's what everyone wants to see here. And these are three really key points. Is the road now becoming safer, and can we really draw that conclusion? Is there serious modal shift? Because it's worthwhile if we achieve that, but I do not see the evidence. And the air pollution. Now, those have to be addressed. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Hearn. And I appreciate the way that you had you said what you did, but you said it in an extremely polite and courteous way. So thank you for that.
I'm seething with anger, and I have controlled myself. But thank you, Councillor Saeed, for the compliment.
Not at all. Thank you. Right,
Chair,
Councillor Khan.
So I'll get John to answer, but Councillor Hearn, I do recognise that this is a big change in Chiswick. We all do. We also recognise we're going through a pandemic, so I do recognise that we are on the same page. But I accept, you know, your 3 points about equality, mode shift, and safety. But before I talk on those, I just want John to help you understand the implications of the safety side and the collisions. Thanks.
Yeah, I guess the starting point is, you know, the question that you raised, and I think it's a good one, you know, is what's the long-term casualty trend on Chiswick High Road? And what we normally do, you know, for the most robust analysis, you take a 3-year period because that kind of irons out changes that go on. And what that shows in our analysis is that there is a casualty issue in Chiswick High Road historically. So the 3-year data for Chiswick High Road showed that there were, I'm just looking at the data now, there were 19 collisions in that 3-year period on Chiswick High Road on the Cycleway 9 portion involving cyclists, which is per kilometre, that's quite worrying. You know, clearly any casualty that happens on, you know, on London's road is one too many, but that is, you know, a disproportionate number. So for us, that would be enough for us to prioritise intervention in a road like Chiswick High Road. What we know from our, you know, from other schemes is where we introduce protected cycle lanes, we do get an improvement in safety. And, you know, you might say that's obvious that should happen because you're protecting cyclists in time and space from other vehicles. I think that there has been a good challenge from residents and others about the safety data that Transport for London put out in the press release. And you know, safety data is a complicated field, and there's different ways of assessing it. And I think that basically what's happened is the community has looked at the raw data from the Metropolitan Police, and what they've done is they've taken account of casualties on the whole of Chiswick High Road, so i.e. from Chiswick Roundabout all the way to Goldhawk Road. And that's not where the temporary cycle lane is, and that's not where Cycleway 9 is. So our assessment only looked at the Chiswick High Road portion where protected cycle lanes is, which is the right assessment to make. In addition, what Transport for London did in our press statement is we only looked at collisions that involved people getting hurt, so casualty, because again, for us, those are the most important collisions. Clearly, other collisions where people sort of have a bump or a shunt can be important, but we're much more interested in where people are actually hurt. So our analysis only looked at people that were hurt. So there was a difference in the way that we were assessing the casualties. And the final thing is that the data that residents, Freedom of Information, the Metropolitan Police, that came through, and the way that we get our data is obviously from the Metropolitan Police, but when it comes to Transport for London, it goes through a further process, a process of validation, to make sure that those casualties have been recorded properly in terms of location, severity, and type. and quite often they do change. So several of the casualties that are in the Freedom of Information request haven't yet gone through that validation process. And if you do look at the raw data, it's also clear why that validation process is important, because it looks like there's some duplication in that raw data. So there's, for example, 2 casualties that look identical, and there needs to be a process by the Metropolitan Police to make sure which of the casualties needs to be properly recorded in our systems. So there is some discrepancy, but TfL stands by the data that we published in the press release, which was 8 casualties, so people being hurt in the 12 months before, and 2 casualties, cyclists being hurt in the period after 6 months.
Can I just ask, Chair, can I ask a point on that? Sorry, Sam, you've got a follow-up.
I was just going to say that's very fair, John, but I stand by what I said. I would like our scrutiny people to actually investigate that themselves and make sure that the report that goes to Cabinet, as far as we as a council can ascertain, actually provides good information to the Cabinet about safety. That's not to say anyone is lying. I mean, it is a difficult area, and I appreciate that, John. I appreciate your honesty.
Yes, can I just...
Yes, Councillor Biddulph.
I agree with the honesty point, but I think there needs to be a very clear statement of what it is that's being measured, both in terms of severity of type of accident and whatever it is, so that it's always like for like. But my understanding, even on the figures at the moment, is that if there were 19 collisions in the last 3 years and 6 in the last 6 months on C9, that's still an increase, accepting that you might have different definitions.
No, I think you're doing the assessment slightly inaccurately, and we can share that information. You know, I've already shared this information with
Hounslow. I think we should do as I said or suggested, and take this offline, but just make sure the report goes forward. I don't think it's worth discussing it a lot more.
Thank you, Councillor Hone. If does anybody else want to respond? Otherwise, it is almost 11 o'clock. I would just like to ask if any members have any thoughts on engagement. Perhaps before we could have discussed it, but now perhaps email it to me. And what we definitely know from tonight is that we need really sound engagement. And we'll definitely take any suggestions into consideration. Thank you. That's going to thank you to Councillor Khan, Councillor Lambert, Jefferson, Andrew, John, and Victoria Lawson. You may leave if you choose. Oh, and Catherine Dunn. Thank you. Right. I would just like to any other matters that I consider urgent, or the chair considered urgent. I just want to let you know that the work program that was developed on the 16th is a living document, and that will continue to be updated as circumstances change. If you have any queries, please feel free to send them to me. I would just like it noted that we now have additional members to the panels. For children and young people's panel, we have Councillor Davina Ram and Councillor Karen Smith. For health and adult social care, we have Councillor Madia Asim, and for housing and environmental panel, we have Councillor Madia Asim. I would just like to remind everybody here that the next meeting will be on the 14th of September 2021. Thank you and good night to everybody.